Counting's underway in the Gorton and Denton by-election, a race which is still too close to call. The Green Party says it's predicting a seismic moment. Labour push back on suggestions they will come third behind Reform. In Manchester at the count, our political correspondent Jack Fenwick is standing by.
We're inching closer towards the results here in Manchester, but right now Labour, the Greens and Reform all say they're not sure who will win.
Well, I'm joined here in the studio by the BBC's election expert, Professor John Curtis.
Well, when the result is declared a little later tonight, I'll be looking very close at the numbers to see what they mean and what are their implications on what could be a historic night in British politics.
Live across the BBC, special coverage of the Gorton and Denton by-election begins now. Hello, I'm Regini Vaidyanathan. A seat that for years has been considered rock solid for Labour could be about to shift. The Greens are predicting a seismic moment in British politics this morning. And could Reform come second? Well, this is the scene live in Manchester as votes continue to be counted in the Gorton and Denton by-election, a race which is being viewed as a key test of Sir Keir Starmer's premiership. Well, if Labour does lose, it will be the first time in nearly 100 years that the Gorton area of Manchester hasn't been represented by an MP from the Labour Party. Well, in a moment, we'll be getting the thoughts of the BBC's election expert, Sir John Curtis, Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University, who will be with me throughout the morning. Well, we are expecting that result in the next hour or so, but if it's as close as many are predicting, we could even be entering recount territory. Well, let's go straight to the count and join our political correspondent, Jack Fenwick, who is there for us. So, Jack, still too close to call. What more are you hearing from the parties on the ground there?
Yeah, still too close to call. We're getting to that stage of the morning where the parties are starting to brief against each other. In the last half hour or so, I've had sources from both Reform and the Greens tell me that they think Labour will come third in this contest. Labour have hit back at those claims, saying that they are not based on any facts. They say that as they're watching the ballot boxes being opened, different ones are good and bad for all three of those parties. It's clearly going to be very, very tight. As you say, not expecting a result for another hour or so. In terms of what that result may mean, if Labour do manage to win, it will no doubt be with a heavily reduced share of the vote compared to what they got at the general election in 2024. Really, it will be a big sigh of relief for Sir Keir Starmer and his allies in the Labour government more than anything else. If Labour don't win this seat, then questions will be asked of the Prime Minister about his very controversial decision to block Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, from standing here. Now, the only member of Labour's ruling National Executive Committee that voted for Andy Burnham to be able to stand was the party's deputy leader, Lucy Powell. Now, Mr Burnham has been campaigning regularly in Gorton and Denton. Many within the Labour camp say that if they do manage to hold on to this seat, then it will be largely thanks to the campaigning that he has done. But as I say, a potential moment of political peril for Sir Keir Starmer if those questions are asked and Labour do lose here. Now, if the Green Party win, it would not only be the first time they've ever won a Westminster by-election, it would also mean they've got their first ever MP in the north of England. No doubt their leader, Zach Polanski, would say that this is evidence that they are able to successfully challenge the Labour government for votes on the left of British politics. And I think if that does happen, we're likely to get people within the Labour Party trying to get Sir Keir Starmer to move left in some ways. If Reform win here, they will say that it's further evidence that they are able to turn that lead they have in the opinion polls into votes on the ground. No matter what happens, we will be reading into it to try and figure out what it all means for those big elections coming up around the country in May.
Indeed. I mean, Jack, this is Labour's sixth safest seat, but the demographics have played a lot into the way this campaign's been run, haven't they?
Yeah, Gorton and Denton is a really interesting constituency with two quite different parts to it. One part of the constituency has a large Muslim population and has lots of students. Now, that is where the Green Party has been trying to pick up the bulk of its votes. One of the issues that they have been campaigning on is the war in Gaza. Now, the other part of the constituency is much more white working class. That's where Reform have been trying to pick up most of their votes. They have been raising issues such as immigration. Now, the Labour Party have been trying to pick up votes in both of those areas, and the issue that all three parties have been focusing lots on is the cost of living. Now, this has been, at times, not a particularly friendly campaign. There have been accusations of racism loaded at different parties towards each other. And just this evening, there is a story brewing here around some election observers who say that they have detected unusually high levels of something called family voting. Now, family voting is an electoral offence. It is where a family member is with somebody at the voting booth and is trying to influence their vote. This group claims that they have seen high levels of that. However, we have heard from the acting returning officer here, that is the person responsible for overseeing that this election runs properly. They say that the people on the ground had not seen any evidence of that. They say that if this observation group had seen evidence, then they should have reported that while the polls were still open. So we're not quite sure what that story means yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if it ends up playing a part in the rows that break out here as the morning goes on.
OK, Jack Fenwick, thank you very much for the moment. We'll be back, of course, with Jack when we hear more from the count. Well, joining me here in the studio is Professor Sir John Curtis, Professor, of course, of Politics at Strathclyde University and the BBC's election expert. You're going to be guiding us through the coming hours here on BBC News. Look, it's fascinating, really, isn't it, John, because this is usually a reliably safe Labour seat. And now we're talking about the possibility, if the Greens are correct, that they may have won this. Yeah,
this is very, very much a traditional Labour seat. It's estimated that back in 2019, if the constituency, which was heavily redrawn at the last general election, had been in existence then, Labour would have got 66% of the vote, and Labour, frankly, have not lost an election in any part of the constituency since 1931, which, of course, was a record bad result for the Labour Party. And Jack's already referred to what were the two traditional pillars of Labour's strength in this constituency, pillars of strength that have been central to Labour's strength in post-war British politics throughout the UK. One, working class voters, and this is a constituency with a relatively large working class population, not particularly well off. There are very high levels, for example, of child poverty in this constituency. And of course, the Labour Party historically is the party of the working class. But both in 2019 and in 2024, Labour were no more successful in winning the votes of working class voters than they were middle class voters. That demographic foundation of Labour's traditional support has gone. But equally in 2024 also, Britain's ethnic minorities have long been predominantly voting Labour, but in the wake of the way in which the Labour Party reacted to the Israeli incursion into Gaza, Muslim voters, those who identify as Muslim, voted in very heavy numbers away from Labour, in some instances voting for the Greens, and in a constituency where over a quarter of the population identifies as Muslim, that has been a key target for the Greens, helped by the fact that George Galloway's Workers' Party, which did also fight this constituency in 2024, and which certainly very, very much tends to win the support of Muslim voters, decided to stand down. So that, if indeed Greens have won this constituency, its ability to eat into the ability to profit from those two weaknesses in Labour's traditional foundation will be a core part of the story.
How much is this seat a microcosm of the national picture at the moment?
Well, it's a microcosm in the sense that, one, we are looking at an election in which two parties that have historically not been a central part of our politics, the Greens and Reform, are amongst those who are challenging for this seat. And our politics in the UK have now become much more fragmented. We no longer have our politics dominated by Conservative and Labour. Rather, we now have Conservative, Labour, the Reform Party, the Greens, and of course the Liberal Democrats. Now the Conservatives have already acknowledged that they think they're going to lose their deposit in this constituency. It just underlines their continuing weakness. Used to be an area where they could get around a third of the vote. And now the question is just how badly, indeed, if they've lost this seat, that Labour have done at all. But insofar as this is going to look like, by historical standards, a poor result for Conservative and Labour, to that extent at least it is reflective of wider patterns we have been seeing in British politics, patterns that are frankly unprecedented in our post-war political history.
It really is fascinating, isn't it, John? Now, one thing we do know, we don't know who's won yet, but we do know the turnout, don't we, John? We know it's 47.62% of the electorate who turned out in Gorton and Denton. Just tell us what this means and how it compares with the general election.
Well, of course, this has been a very viciously fought campaign. Some people have felt it's not been entirely edifying, and we've just heard from Jack how the parties are still sparring with each other even now as the count is going on. But the one thing that that campaign does seem to have done is to take voters to the polls. Now, for just under 48%, the turnout's not particularly high, but this is a constituency where generally turnout tends to be low. And in fact, the turnout now appears to be about a percentage point higher than it was in the 2024 general election. You have to go back to 1983 to find the last time that the turnout in a by-election was higher in the constituency than it had been at the previous general election. It was in Darlington in 1983, an election that took place in the wake of the rise of the SDP. They seemed to be threatening the Labour Party seriously, and indeed it was felt that if Labour had lost that by-election, Michael Foot's tenure as Labour leader might well have been under question. Well, Labour managed to hang on to that by-election on a very high turnout, but of course then went on to lose the 1983 election. But it is very, very unusual that the turnout in a by-election is actually higher than it was in the previous general election. So whatever else we think about the campaign, it does seem to have helped to bring voters to the polls.
Yeah, it really has galvanised. We talked about this already with Jack briefly, but I wanted to get your thoughts on how the demographics have turned this election around in many ways, because we've seen the parties target in some way certain groups.
Yes, undoubtedly. As already suggested, the Greens' target groups were essentially, first of all, the very substantial Muslim community, particularly in the Muslim end of the constituency, some of which is majority ethnic minority and predominantly Muslim. And secondly, also, it's a constituency in the Manchester end again, which has got a fair number of younger voters, some of the students attending the city's universities. And if we go back to what happened in 2024, these were groups amongst whom the Greens did well. And in fact, now in most opinion polls, the Greens are first amongst the under 35s. So essentially, therefore, the way in which the Greens, and again, the limited polling we had in the constituency suggests indeed it was Muslims, it was younger voters who were voting for the Greens, again, reflects how the Greens are now being able to do particularly well in these two demographics. Reform, in contrast, they are the party of older voters, but they are a party now which does disproportionately well amongst those people who have had less in the way of educational experience. People, therefore, are more likely to be in working class jobs. That's what Reform focused on. It's where their message of tightening on immigration, doubtful about equalities policies, messages that don't go down well with the ethnic minority population in this constituency, but do go down well with some white working class voters. And that's where Reform, however well even they have done, will look, according to the polling, have got most of their support. And again, that is redolent of where Reform are doing well across the UK as a whole.
OK, John, thank you for the moment. Of course, those votes continue to be counted and you'll continue to be looking into what that all means so far. But we still don't know, of course.
Of course not.
Well, let's hear from some of the parties. Well, shortly after the polls closed, the leader of the Green Party of England and Wales, Zach Polansky, was positive about his party's position in Gorton and Denton.
I'd like to call that I'm feeling incredibly proud of Hannah Spencer and the Green Party. This is our 127th target seat. Now, when I became leader 6 months ago, if you told me we could seriously come second place or even first place in a national by-election and challenge this Labour government in what's so-called used to be a safe Labour seat, I'd say that's pretty remarkable.
That's Zach Polansky there. Well, speaking to my colleague Paddy O'Connell on BBC Newsnight, Reform UK chairman David Bull said he hopes his party can capitalise on voters being split between the Greens and Labour.
It's Labour's 6 safest seats. So for us, in terms of our target seats, this is 440. Just take that into consideration for the moment. What we are seeing, it's a three-way marginal. We're seeing the Greens and Labour fighting each other. There is a possibility we can go straight through the middle. I'm very hopeful, given we've had 5,000 people out, supporters and volunteers, and today we've had over 1,000 people knocking people up. I have to say the Reform UK group family have been absolutely extraordinary.
So how did we get to this point, and why are the stakes so high? Well, Gorton and Denton only became a constituency after it was created through boundary changes in 2024. But the area has, as we've been saying, a very strong history of voting Labour. Well, this contest was triggered at the end of January after the former MP, I should say, Andrew Gwynn announced that he was standing down on health grounds. Now, it came almost a year after he had the party whip removed for offensive comments that he made in a private WhatsApp chat. Well, Andrew Gwynn's decision to stand down created a major political headache for the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. He personally intervened to prevent Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, from becoming the Labour candidate there. Critics say this was because Andy Burnham is seen as a potential rival for the party's leadership. Well, there are 11 candidates in the running tonight, but many analysts see this, as we've been discussing, as a by-election three-horse race between Labour, Reform UK and the Green Party of England and Wales. And as we said earlier, the stakes couldn't be higher, as Prime Minister Starmer's been under massive pressure over the past few months, dealing with crisis after crisis. This by-election is also being seen, as we've said, as a key test of his premiership. Well, let's speak now to the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Lucy Powell. Thanks very much for joining us. How are you feeling tonight, and what do you think your party's chances are? Because we're hearing from the Greens and Reform that Labour's likely to come third in this. Is that your reading?
We don't know the final result yet, but I think what is clear is that the Green Party have been able to turn out their vote more strongly this evening than we have. I think there is a very clear majority in this constituency that wanted to reject reform. We were obviously all making our differing arguments for why we were best placed to do that, and on the night, on the day, the Green Party have been able to do that, I think, more effectively than we have. But we have fought a positive campaign. We've brought hundreds of our activists out and supporters out, and I've had many of those conversations myself. We've had thousands and thousands of conversations.
So, Lucy Powell, are you
people have really been grappling with that?
Are you essentially conceding defeat in what you're saying there? And we've just heard from the Green Party. They say that they are confident now of a win.
Well, we don't know the exact result, but I think it is clear that the Green Party have turned out their vote more strongly than we have this evening.
If indeed it is to be the case that Labour loses that seat, will you be blaming your fellow members of the NEC for not voting as you did for Andy Burnham as the candidate?
Well, look, we had a fantastic candidate in this by-election. Obviously, the discussions about... She wasn't
fantastic enough if she hasn't won. And all that we are seeing so far suggests that she hasn't won.
Well, look, Andy Burnham has been out campaigning with us nearly every day as well. We've all been working as one Labour team to get a Labour victory in this constituency. You know, the conversations about Andy standing were the story of a few weeks ago, and we have moved on from that. And those decisions were taken at the time because people were thinking about ahead to a possible by-election in the Greater Manchester Mayor that might have triggered as well. But look, I don't want to take away from the fact that our candidate in this campaign is a brilliant candidate. She fought a very positive campaign, offering a message of hope and of unity. And you know, we've been battling hard for every single vote in this constituency. And as I say, I think what is really clear is that there is a majority that wants to reject the politics of division and hate that Reform have been peddling. We would have preferred on this occasion for people to have come to Labour for that. I think looking forward to the next general election, when that would be about who's going to form the government, that would very much be between Labour and Reform at that point, in a way that it isn't in a mid-term by-election. But look, I'm not trying to suggest that there's nothing to reflect on here. Of course there is. We know, and we've been really clear about this in recent weeks, before this by-election was even called, that we have to give a much clearer account of ourselves as a Labour Party, showing our Labour values, telling that Labour story about how we are on people's side and how we are dealing with the issues that they face, particularly the cost of living crisis that's happening. And this just makes us now redouble our efforts to do that and make sure that people understand what we're really about as a Labour government, and that's not been something that we've been able to get across as strongly as we would like over recent months.
Do you think that the party's lost the argument on foreign policy, and in particular on your messaging around Gaza, which the Greens were very focused on?
I mean, actually, that wasn't one of the big issues on the doorstep in this campaign. The single biggest conversation that we all had on the doorstep was about people grappling with what was the right thing to do in order to make sure that the nasty politics of reform didn't come into Manchester and Denton, which I think have overwhelmingly been rejected. There are huge issues going on around the world, and our Prime Minister Keir Starmer has to navigate those waters very carefully, as he does. But I'm particularly proud that it was this Labour government, after many years of campaigning for it, that has recognised the state of Palestine, which is the first step to self-determination and to a two-state solution in the region, which is something that's long overdue. But actually those issues weren't at the fore of the conversations that we were all having here, and there will be time, I'm sure, to look into what were the conversations we were having.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the Prime Minister. Do you think now there will be more calls for him to step aside, given this loss? Potential loss.
Well, I hope not, because... Well, look, I hope not, because I think what we've actually also shown here the last few weeks, something I'm really proud of, is that the whole Labour team has come together as one team. We've had Andy Burnham, Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner, Wes Streeting, myself, colleagues right from the Cabinet, right across the Labour movement, coming together as one team with a united message in this campaign. And I think that's when we show ourselves at our best, and that's when we can actually cut through and tell the story that we need to tell of the Labour government doing Labour things with Labour values on behalf of people, standing up against the politics of division and hate, and standing up against reform, who said, by the way, they were going to come in and sweep through this seat. They put a huge amount of money and resources in, and their politics have been resoundly rejected.
I just want to jump in, though.
And we're going to take that on.
I want to jump in, because everything you're saying is all well and good, but voters have a lot of frustrations with the Labour government at the moment. The party is being accused of making a number of U-turns on various policies, and there are still many questions around, of course, the Prime Minister's appointment of Peter Mandelson to the US ambassador role. You can't skirt around the issue. This is a party that really does have to rethink the way it's messaging.
Well, I hear people's frustrations, believe me. No one's had more conversations with the voters of Gorton and Denton over the last few weeks than me, and other voters as well. And I hear people's frustrations. We have had a huge number of difficult issues to deal with since we won the general election, and we do need to, as I've said many times before, we need to make sure that we make fewer mistakes and fewer missteps, and that we do tell a much stronger story about the Labour government and show whose side we are really on and the values that we hold, and that most importantly that we deliver the kind of change that people want to see delivered. And actually here in Manchester, one of the reasons why we found more resilient support on the doorstep in this by-election than I think many pundits and commentators expected us to find here in this by-election. One of the reasons for that is that here in Manchester, people have seen Labour delivering for them over a longer period of time. Better buses, more social housing, now working alongside a Labour government to deal with the cost of living crisis. But yeah, absolutely. Do we need to change how we operate? Yes, the Prime Minister's made that really clear himself as well over recent weeks.
But also,
we do need to change how we're doing things, and we need to change what we're saying.
I appreciate you've talked about some of the areas you feel are important on the doorstep, and you have been, of course, knocking on more doors than most people when it comes to understanding the voters where you are. But there is a broader question about the party in that the Greens potentially winning this seat, they say that they believe that they are very confident of a win, does show that Labour does need to do more to win over voters on the left. We saw that the Workers' Party stepped aside. It's likely that many of those voters went to Labour. Is that a crisis for the party? Does the party need to look at where it is ideologically and look in a bit more detail about how it can win those voters on the left that have deserted Labour?
Well, look, I mean, first of all, I don't want to play things down, but I do just want to have things in context as well, and I think you do have to get that balance right. Absolutely, there is a progressive majority in this constituency and perhaps right across the country as well, and it is Labour's job to really unite and lead that, and it will only be Labour that really does that at a general election, because I don't think anybody would seriously suggesting that the Green Party would be in any position to form a government at the next election. So it will be Labour up against Reform at the next general election. But yes, absolutely. But just let me finish. Let me just finish that point. You know, absolutely. Do we need to make sure that people hear our Labour values, the Labour bit of the Labour government? Of course, you know, we all agree with that, and that is something that we are going to be doing much more strongly, I'm sure, over the coming weeks and months. And is there a future for us in trying to sort of out-reform reform? We'll know, and I've been saying that for many weeks now as well. So I think people will be clear about that.
Two more very quick questions, just can be yes or no. The next one is your understanding that Labour's come third behind Reform? We Greens believe that they've won the seat, but is your understanding that you're in third place?
No, I mean, I think it's very tight. It's very, very tight. I don't think we know the answer to that, and we haven't got the full results yet. Okay,
and one more, if I may, simple yes or no for this one. Do you think you'd have won the seat if Andy Burnham was running?
Well, look, that's a different discussion for a different day, and we had a candidate here, a great local candidate. Andy Burnham was out with us nearly every day, helping us to tell the story.
We'll see, that's the point.
He wasn't on the ballot, and you know, had he won this seat, we would have then been facing a by-election across the whole of Greater Manchester as well. So that was the decision that took place at that time. That was a decision that we took many weeks ago. We moved on from that, and we put all shoulders to the wheel. Andy Burnham, myself, Keir Starmer, every member of the cabinet, and the PLB, you know, who all came out as well. We all were united behind the candidate that we had and the campaign that we were trying to deliver here.
Okay, Lucy Powell, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Let's bring you that breaking news there. And the Green Party is saying that they are very confident of a win in the Gorton and Denton by-election. Let's go straight to John Curtis for your thoughts on that. If that is the case, when we see the returning officer deliver the result, that would make history, wouldn't it?
It would make history, because it will be the first time that the Greens have managed to win a Westminster parliamentary by-election. Indeed, hitherto, they've never won more than 10% of the vote in any by-election. That was back in Somerton and Frome back in 2023. And then worth bearing in mind, the second by-election of this Parliament. The first one was won by the Greens, by Reform in Runcorn, and now it sounds as though this one has been won by the Greens in Gorton. And if we want a kind of simple illustration of the way in which the traditional Conservative Labour duopoly, its dominance of British politics, is now under challenge, I think those two simple facts indicate what's going on. I mean, I think 2 points I think one might make about Lucy Powell's interview. The first is that for those of us who are veterans of by-election nights, it is often the case that those who lose seek comfort in saying, well, somebody else also lost as well. And to that extent, at least, perhaps focusing on the battle between reform is really enabling Labour to hide from what actually is the real problem for them in this by-election.
OK, thanks for the moment, John. Live from London, this is BBC News. Town counting continues in the Gorton and Denton by-election, which is a key test for the Labour Party. Well, the Greens say they are confident of a win there. Labour's deputy leader tells the BBC it's clear that the Greens have turned out more strongly than they have. Live across the BBC, special coverage of the Gorton and Denton by-election begins now. Well, let's go straight to the count in Manchester and speak to our political correspondent, Jack Fenwick. So quite a big development since we last spoke, because a source from the Green Party saying that they are very confident of a win. Just tell us more about what you're hearing on the ground there. I mean, counting still, of course, underway. We don't know until we hear that result from the returning officer, but it does give you an indication of where things are going.
Yeah, we don't have the result yet, of course, but that quote from a Green Party source, along with that interview we've just heard from the Labour deputy leader, Lucy Powell, feels like a big turning point in the story of this evening. Lucy Powell didn't concede this by-election, but I think that she got as close to conceding it as you can without crossing over that line. She said that the Green Party had managed to get the vote out on the day more successfully than the Labour Party had. We knew that that was always likely to be one of the main factors in this by-election. In a close-run thing between three parties, their ability to get the people who support them to the ballot box on the day was always going to be a big factor. Lucy Powell said the Greens had done that more successfully than them. She said that the message that Labour had put out there, that they perhaps hadn't been able to get it across as strongly as they would have liked. And there were hints at the implications to come for the Labour Party. We know that this campaign in the early days was dominated by that big row over whether or not Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, was going to be able to stand in this election. In the end, Sir Keir Starmer blocked him from standing. He said because he didn't want to force a potential Greater Manchester mayoralty by-election. Many people said it was because Sir Keir Starmer was actually worried that Andy Burnham would then challenge him for the party leadership. Now, Lucy Powell was the only member of Labour's ruling National Executive Committee that voted for Andy Burnham to be allowed to stand in this. She wanted Andy Burnham to be able to put his name in the hat to be Labour's candidate here. Now, when asked whether that was the reason they lost, she said that's a different discussion for a different day. Now, to me, that indicates that at some point that discussion is going to happen. And I would have thought if the Green Party do win here this morning, as Lucy Powell was suggesting, as the Green Party are now suggesting, then that conversation will crop up pretty soon. We know that the Prime Minister has had a really tough few weeks. It's not that long ago that on one particular day it looked like he might resign. In the end, Labour MPs didn't go over the top in criticising him. The cabinet rallied around him, but it felt then like many Labour MPs were sort of waiting for the next potential moment. Now, I still think that's more likely to come if Labour have a really tough day in the elections to come in May. But the big question, if the Green Party do win, will be, are any Labour MPs going to put their heads above the parapet and say, Sir Keir Starmer is responsible for this and call for him to go. That will be where these discussions end up going. Also a hint that Lucy Powell perhaps wants Keir Starmer to move the party in a left-wing direction. She said, is there a future for us in trying to out-reform reform? No. I think that's a hint of where things are going to go if the Greens win.
Jack, just another question on what you touched on there. You speak to members of the Parliamentary Labour Party. I know you haven't had a chance to speak to any since that interview that I did with Lucy Powell, but I was just curious, was there a sense amongst some that if the party did not win this by-election, there could be more conversations about the Prime Minister's leadership, or are we essentially looking to the local elections for those sort of conversations?
I think the answer to that question has changed in recent weeks. A few weeks ago, it felt like a loss in this by-election would have been a potential moment in which Labour MPs could say, is Sir Keir Starmer the right person to be leading us? The conversations I've been having in the last week have indicated that actually even a Labour loss here probably wouldn't be that moment. I think when the Cabinet rallied around Sir Keir Starmer a few weeks ago, it probably bought him some more time. It's probably more likely that they're looking to May to see how they do in those elections, but that is not a definite. We don't know what the result will be here. If Labour do lose, we don't know how big a loss that will be, and all of those factors will ultimately be the decider on what Labour MPs decide to do next. But I will say, people I've spoken to in Labour, Reform and the Greens over the last couple of days have all said that they think if Andy Burnham was the candidate, then Labour would have won this by-election. Inevitably, even if this doesn't prove to be the moment that Labour MPs move against Sir Keir Starmer, it will lead to difficult questions for the Prime Minister. Of course, as I've said a couple of times, the big caveat to that is that we still do not know the election result here. We know the Greens are now very confident. We know that Labour are talking up their chances, but we are still waiting to get the actual result.
Of course we are, and we only know that, of course, when we see the returning officer stand on the stage and deliver it where you are. It looks like they're still very furiously counting, so we'll leave you for the moment. Well, let's get the thoughts of Sir John Curtis, our election expert, guiding us through elections over the years and by-elections. But I don't think you've ever sat in that seat before and said that we're likely for a Green win.
No, we've never said it before because it's never happened before. This is indeed, to that extent, at least Hannah Spencer, the Green candidate, if indeed she has won, will already have written her place in the history books as the first Green candidate to manage to win a parliamentary by-election. And I think, by the way, I mean, just also again coming back to Lucy Powell's interview, I mean, she said with a great deal of confidence that the idea that the Greens would be significant challengers in the general election and potential candidates for government was inconceivable, given they only had a few MPs inside the House of Commons. One was tempted to say in response, well, at the moment we have ahead in the opinion polls, and according to many of them, a party that is heading for an overall majority, that is Reform, which only has a few MPs inside the House of Commons. So I thought that was, in some sense, quite remarkable. Now, I think undoubtedly, I mean, I agree largely with Jack's analysis about what all this means for Keir Starmer. The problem number one for Keir Starmer is that he will have to own this defeat. Having decided to block Andy Burnham as the candidate, it was his candidate effectively who stood, and it is his candidate who apparently has lost.
And it's important, John, to say that Andy Burnham is the Labour politician who polls the highest.
Yes, I know, but I think this takes us to another broader point about where we are so far as the Labour is concerned. I mean, the first reason I think why there won't be a significant move against Keir Starmer now is because there are elections on May the 7th across most of England, Scotland and Wales, and to suddenly push the party into a leadership election and a leadership crisis just weeks before large sections of the country is going to the polls, I think would just be very, very unusual. But the second thing we would say is that certainly with Andy Burnham not at the moment a potential leadership candidate because he's not inside the House of Commons, there isn't anybody who is obviously Keir Starmer's successor. For people like Wes Streeting, Angela Raining, Ed Miliband, all these names that have been mentioned, well, if you look at the opinion polling, even amongst 2024 Labour voters, for every one person who thinks reasonably highly of these persons, there's another one who doesn't think of them very highly. In other words, none of them are particularly popular amongst 2024 Labour voters. And therefore, we do not know actually whether or not, if Keir Starmer were to be replaced, how far this would actually prove to be any kind of immediate remedy to Labour's low position in the opinion polls. This party is running on average at 20%, let alone, of course, we do not know, and this is also true of Andy Burnham, just whether or not any of the characters will be better able to do the job of Prime Minister than many of Keir Starmer's critics fear he's not doing at the moment. And the basic criticism of the Prime Minister is that he's never provided his government with a clear story about what it's about, a sense of direction, or given voters a clear idea of the kind of country he would want to create. He's been very much focusing on trying to solve problems rather than conveying the country with a vision. And because quite a few things have gone wrong, and because turning things around has proven to be quite difficult, particularly on the health service and on the economy, voters have become disenchanted quite quickly.
We talk about, I mean, again, we don't know that the Greens have won, but they're feeling confident about it. They ran a campaign, although Zach Polanski might disagree on how much of a balance that was, but they ran a campaign that was very much focused on the issue of Gaza in some of its leafleting and campaign strategy. That's an issue that won't necessarily translate in the next general election, or is it?
Well, it will translate in those constituencies where there is a non-trivial proportion of people who identify as Muslim. And those constituencies include, by the way, that of the Home Secretary, Sabina Mahmood, and Wes Streeting, both of whom had relatively narrow squeaks in the general election. So sure, it's not a foundation that is going to take the Greens to 326 seats in the House of Commons. But it is a foundation, with Labour's position so low, that would certainly be capable of turning the Greens into a significant parliamentary force, given that they are also, the other part of their story is that they are doing particularly well amongst younger voters, including not least university students. And one does think it's, whether again the Labour Party was a bit behind the curve. We are being told that maybe next week we'll be hearing something about changing the repayment of university tuition fees. Maybe Labour might have been wise to have come up with that announcement before the voters went to the poll in Gorton and Denton, because at least that might have, because the Greens again have been very campaigning quite strongly on the issue of university tuition fees as well.
We're talking about, of course, the Greens and Reform and Labour. We're not really talking at all about the Lib Dems and the Conservatives. Now, I know in the last general election they weren't in the top three, but if we're using this as a national microcosm in any way, John, is there a sense now that we could be heading to a five-party system when we're in the next general election?
Yeah, to be honest, I've felt, on July the 5th, 2024, that the question facing British politics was whether or not we would now see the end of the traditional two-party system of Conservative versus Labour. Just bear in mind, even in 2024, fewer than 3 in 5 of the votes cast were cast for one of those two parties. That was the lowest share since 1922, which is the election in which Labour displaced the Conservatives as their principal opponents instead of the Liberal Party. In opinion polls now, collectively, they are at less than 2 in 5. So that question is there. Reform support has it plateaued a long time ago, but they look to be consistently able to get 30% and have been in that position since May of last year. And now it's since Zach Polanski became leader of the Greens in September of last year that they have moved forward. And I think one of the interesting things about both these parties, well, they've got two characteristics. One is they are led by charismatic politicians, Nigel Farage and Zach Polanski. Secondly, they are politicians who are not trying to go into the middle on the ideological spectrum, which is where elections are supposedly normally won and lost. They are setting up very strong views about, very different views about this country. Zach Polanski has wanted to create a much more equal society. He's relatively socially liberal on things like immigration and on drugs, reform, very concerned about immigration. Most of their voters believe in Brexit, and they're very sceptical about all this equality stuff, as they would put it. And these are very, very different stances. The Labour Party in this by-election, it says its hope of winning was indeed by getting still some working class voters and some Muslims and some young voters to vote for it, it might still, by putting those together, still might be able to come ahead. But I think here we've had an indication as to how the parties of the extremes are, at the moment at least, able to win votes in a way that historically we have not seen. And therefore now we are certainly in a position after tonight of not only saying that the Conservatives are facing an existential crisis vis-à-vis the challenge from reform, but Labour are now also at risk of facing an existential crisis in the form of the challenge from the Greens, i.e. both parties are now finding themselves challenged by parties further to the right and further to the left. And we have not seen that before in British politics.
That is fascinating, isn't it, John? I'm sure we'll be discussing that more as the evening goes on, but it really does underpin the fact that this is a really consequential by-election, isn't it? We'll be back with John in a moment. Well, John referenced there an interview with Lucy Powell. We'll play that to you in a moment, but this is the scene live in Manchester as those votes continue to be counted for that by-election. We don't know when exactly we will see the returning officer take to the stage to announce that result, but it is quite telling that Green Party sources believe that they are very confident of a win. That would be, of course, a huge blow for the Labour Party, who have held the seat or the area as the seat changed in 2024 for decades. And they won the seat in 2024 with a majority of around 13,000. So as votes are continuing to be counted there, we will, of course, bring you that result when it comes in. But it already does feel like Labour might have already conceded a loss. I've been speaking to the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Lucy Powell, and she said that the Green Party turned out their voters more effectively than Labour did for the by-election. Let's have a listen to more.
We don't know the final result yet, but I think what is clear is that the Green Party have been able to turn out their vote more strongly this evening than we have. I think there is a very clear majority in this constituency that wanted to reject reform. We were obviously all making our differing arguments for why we were best placed to do that, and on the night, on the day, the Green Party have been able to do that, I think, more effectively than we have. But we have fought a positive campaign. We've brought hundreds of our activists out and supporters out, and I've had many of those conversations myself. We've had thousands and thousands of conversations.
So Lucy Powell, are you
people
essentially
have really been grappling with that?
Are you essentially conceding defeat in what you're saying there? And we've just heard from the Green Party. They say that they are confident now of a win.
Well, we don't know the exact result, but I think it is clear that the Green Party have turned out their vote more strongly than we have this evening.
If indeed it is to be the case that Labour loses that seat, will you be blaming your fellow members of the NEC for not voting as you did for Andy Burnham as the candidate?
Well, look, we had a fantastic candidate in this by-election. Obviously, the
but
discussions
she wasn't fantastic enough if she
Andy's...
hasn't won. And all that we are seeing so far suggests that she hasn't won.
Well, look, Andy Burnham has been out campaigning with us nearly every day as well. We've all been working as one Labour team to get a Labour victory in this constituency. You know, the conversations about Andy standing were the story of a few weeks ago, and we have moved on from that. And those decisions were taken at the time because people were thinking about ahead to a possible by-election in the Greater Manchester Mayor that might have triggered as well. But look, I don't want to take away from the fact that our candidate in this campaign is a brilliant candidate. She fought a very positive campaign, offering a message of hope and of unity, and you know, we've been battling hard for every single vote in this constituency. And as I say, I think what is really clear is that there is a majority that wants to reject the politics of division and hate that Reform have been peddling. We would have preferred on this occasion for people to have come to Labour for that. I think looking forward to the next general election, when that would be about who's going to form the government, that would very very much be between Labour and Reform at that point in a way that it isn't in a mid-term by-election. But look, I'm not trying to suggest that there's nothing to reflect on here. Of course there is. We know, and we've been really clear about this in recent weeks, before this by-election was even called, that we have to give a much clearer account of ourselves as a Labour Party, showing our Labour values, telling that Labour story about how we are on people's side and how we are dealing with the issues that they face, particularly the cost of living crisis that's happening. And this just makes us now redouble our efforts to do that and make sure that people understand what we're really about as a Labour government, and that's not been something that we've been able to get across as strongly as we would like over recent months.
Do you think that the party's lost the argument on foreign policy, and in particular on your messaging around Gaza, which the Greens were very focused on?
I mean, actually, that wasn't one of the big issues on the doorstep in this campaign. The single biggest conversation that we all had on the doorstep was about people grappling with what was the right thing to do in order to make sure that the nasty politics of reform didn't come into Manchester and Denton, which I think have overwhelmingly been rejected. There are huge issues going on around the world, and our Prime Minister Keir Starmer has to navigate those waters very carefully, as he does. But I'm particularly proud that it was this Labour government, after many, many, many years of campaigning for it, that has recognised the state of Palestine, which is the first step to self-determination and to a two-state solution in the region, which is something that's long, long overdue. But actually those issues weren't at the fore of the conversations that we were all having here, and there will be time, I'm sure, to look into what were the conversations we were having.
That's Lucy Powell speaking to me a short while ago. Well, let's speak to John Tong, a Professor of Politics at the University of Liverpool, who is in Manchester as well. John, good to have you on our special coverage here on BBC News. What are your thoughts on what you heard from Lucy Powell there?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that was tantamount to a concession speech from Lucy Powell. I think the second point to make is that effectively Labour lost this by-election more than a month ago when Andy Burnham was blocked as the Labour Party candidate. Andy Burnham was surely the one candidate that Labour could have relied on to actually hold this seat. Tonight, it looks as if Gorton and Denton will be making Hannah Spencer, the Green candidate, the MP for this constituency. It's less than 2 years ago that Hannah Spencer went up against Andy Burnham for the Greater Manchester mayoralty. Andy Burnham beat her by 375,000 votes. He has phenomenal popularity, 2/3 of the vote in each Greater Manchester mayoral contest that there's been. So it's an interesting strategy to block the candidate who might win the seat for you. Perfectly understandable reasons why Keir Starmer went down that route, but it was about Keir Starmer's personal political security, that candidate selection, not just who should be the best candidate for Labour, for Gorton and Denton. I also would acknowledge Keir Starmer didn't want to risk a wider Greater Manchester mayoralty by-election, which would have been precipitated if Andy Burnham was the parliamentary candidate here, because he might have had the same problems combating the Greens and Reform. But nonetheless, the fact is, if you rule out your best candidate, you have a problem. And the blocking Burnham strategy bought a month for Keir Starmer, but it hasn't bought any longer because the wind is again now out of Labour's sails. And they've got, that horrendously potentially difficult set of elections coming up, the English local elections, the Scottish Parliament elections, the Welsh Parliament elections in May. So it's I think the problems tonight for Keir Starmer have multiplied several-fold over a temporary strategy. I think it's also worth making the point that Lucy Powell wanted Andy Burnham to stand here. She was the only member of that National Executive subcommittee, as the local Manchester Central MP who thought Andy Burnham was the right candidate for this area. So I think there's problems for Labour. That's taking away nothing from the Greens, who clearly have mobilised across the constituency. Their vote has not just been in the majority Muslim areas. Some of those bundles behind where I'm speaking at the moment suggest that the Greens had a substantial vote also in Denton, the Denton part of the constituency.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? And I mean, there's some speculation. Of course, we won't know until the returning officer stands up and announces the result. But there's some speculation that Labour could be placed third.
Which would be a huge embarrassment. Let's face it, this is one of Labour's safest constituencies. Traditionally, Manchester has been very loyal to the Labour Party. Manchester Gorton has been a Labour seat in perpetuity in the past. And if you look at Labour's by-election defences over the last 8 decades in what is now Greater Manchester, there's been 19 such by-election defences from Labour, and they've held the constituency in 16 of those cases. So in that sense, it's a shock. And I have to say, when Labour's team arrived here tonight at the start of the count, I was here at 10 o'clock, and Labour were quite chipper. They were quite optimistic that they were going to hold this seat. There was a reason that Keir Starmer came to the constituency, unusually for a sitting Prime Minister to come and campaign, because Labour's canvassing returns were more optimistic. Labour had themselves ahead in all bar Longsight and Levenshulme, 2 of the wards, the majority Muslim wards. Labour acknowledged that the Greens were ahead, but their own canvassing returns suggested a much more optimistic picture than the one that appears to have unfolded tonight.
And John, let's talk about reform as well, because nationally they're riding high in the polls. But the Green Party looks like it. Again, caveat as always that we still don't know. But from what they're saying, looks like they have pipped them to the post.
Yeah, Reform will be relatively content, I think, with second place. It was always going to be a big ask for Reform to win this constituency because they were concentrating their efforts, particularly in the Denton part of the constituency. But that's only just over 1/3 of the constituency. That's the area that is overwhelmingly white British. And if you look at the posters and that were there, the leaflets in windows, the Reform effort was largely concentrated in Denton. They won some support in Gorton, which is the sort of the white area on the Manchester side of the constituency, but elsewhere they were always going to struggle for votes to some extent. But the fact that Labour appears to have been, with that major caveat we don't know yet, if Labour's been beaten into third place by Reform, that is an even bigger embarrassment for the Labour Party, given the hitherto status of this constituency as a safe Labour seat.
OK, John Tong, Professor of Politics at the University of Liverpool. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, of course, live from the count as it continues there. John's still in the studio with me, from one John to another. I was interested in what we heard there from John Tong, and we're seeing it again from our political editor, Chris Mason, who's written about this on the BBC website as well, is that the Green Party is saying that it's confident that they are going to win the seat and that they did well in the Denton as well as the Manchester part of the constituency. So that would mean that they did well in areas that they perhaps weren't expected to do well in. Yes,
and of course then what we can't get into, but would be interesting to know, is who were the kinds of voters they did well in Denton, and my guess would be is that they would have done relatively well in the younger members of that part of the constituency. Well, yeah, the students or just younger people in general, because that's again a constituency where they're inclined to do relatively well. But yes, I mean, rumour has it that basically the Greens were often managing to be doing as well as Labour in that part of the constituency, although Reform were ahead. But yeah, sure, and I think the point was, if the Greens were going to win this constituency, they would need to add more to it than simply a substantial vote amongst Muslims, and that does indeed seem to be part of what they've managed to achieve. And again, I think one needs to bear in mind, if you're looking at the Green support more generally, where and in constituencies where there isn't a substantial Muslim community, they still have now very high levels of support amongst younger people in general. They appeal particularly well to people who are both on the left and people who are social liberal, the folk who are, not so concerned about immigration, maybe think that declassifying at least some drugs is a good idea, etc., etc. They do have a clear constituency there. Now, I think, frankly, like Reform's constituency, or primarily social conservatives, pro-Brexit, anti-immigration people, it's a niche market. But we are now in the politics of niche markets. We have moved away from the politics whereby a party has to be able to appeal broadly across the public to be able to enjoy electoral success in at least some parts of the country.
Indeed. And the other thing that's interesting to discuss, again, caveat is we still don't know who's won, but it's looking likely that it is the Greens, is at the moment they don't have any MPs in the northwest of England. Most of their MPs are concentrated in the south or the southwest of England. So this would also be quite a seismic shift, because the northwest is an area, as you say, that has different demographics and is more reliably Labour in these areas.
That's true, though I think the truth is, I mean, the interesting thing about the Greens' success in the general election is that it came in two parts. So there was the success, I mean, apart from keeping the seat in Brighton, even though the incumbent MP was standing down, they won Bristol Central. Now, those are constituencies, I mean, not the same as Gorton, because they don't have the Muslim population, but they have lots of young people, lots of students, right? And they are constituencies that would otherwise be expected to vote Labour. But they then also won North Herefordshire, and they won Waveney Valley, which are hitherto been Conservative constituencies, where essentially the Greens' success seemed to rely primarily on doing what the Liberal Democrats have done historically, which is do quite well in local government, and then on the basis of that manage to promote a local well-known person who then manages to win the parliamentary constituency. And it's raised interesting questions about, we've got a Green parliamentary party that in a sense it rests on two very different kinds of constituencies. Now, what Zach Polanski has done as leader is very clearly orientate the party towards what we might call the Bristol and the Brighton strategy, rather than the Herefordshire or Norfolk strategy. And this, in a sense, is therefore his success. And certainly, given that this was a constituency where not only might he hope that his left-wing stance would appeal to some voters, but also there is that substantial block of Muslim voters. It meant, and to that extent at least, it was an ideal constituency for him to be fighting as his first occasion as the Greens parliamentary leader.
And as we heard from the other John just now, going back to the problems for Sir Keir Starmer now, potentially, the fact is that Andy Burnham beat Hannah Spencer.
Oh, sure. Yeah, look, I mean, Andy Burnham is popular. Andy Burnham's success in the morality for Greater Manchester elections is well beyond what you would expect, simply because he is a Labour candidate. But that, of course, was the problem for Keir Starmer, because the opinion polling suggests that, I said earlier, you talk about West Streeting or Andy or whatever, not obvious that they are particularly popular amongst even 2024 Labour voters. At least Andy Burnham, on balance, is popular with those who voted Labour in 2024. That's why he might well have looked like a credible candidate to Labour MPs who are concerned about the future of their parliamentary careers under Keir Starmer. But that also meant that's the reason why Keir Starmer didn't want to allow Andy Burnham into the constituencies. Though, of course, I think the implication of John Tongue's remarks, of course, is that maybe the wiser strategy might have been to allow Andy Burnham to win the constituency, because then at least the position at the moment for Keir Starmer will be much stronger in these early hours of the morning than they look at the moment. Though, of course, it still then leaves the question of what's going to happen on May the 7th.
John, we're just showing the screen there. On the screen, we can see the podium being set up. Of course, no returning officer yet, but I wonder if that means we are closer to a result than further away from it.
That is usually a sign. I mean, what you're then also looking to see is, whether there's a huddle between the returning officer and the candidates, trying to tell them, what the result's going to be. I don't know yet whether or not the returning officer and the agents have gone through all the ballot papers that have been thrown out on the grounds it isn't clear what people were trying to vote for, and there's sometimes some argument about that. And then, of course, the $64,000 question that you and I are waiting the answer for, which is perhaps now no longer who has won, but is there a risk of a recount? Now, from what we've heard, and that Labour conceding they have lost, that perhaps now that risk has diminished, and therefore we might get a result.
Well, the other question is who will come second?
Yes, that is what we still don't know. And again, just to kind of give you some idea, if indeed Reform do pinch second place, this will be the first parliamentary by-election, with one exceptional case of Rochdale, when Labour withdrew their support from their candidate. It will be the first parliamentary by-election in which neither Labour nor the Conservatives are in first or second place. And again, it will be an indication of how our politics is changing. We will have a contest between the Greens and Reform. In much the same way, of course, in the Caerphilly-Senedd by-election a few weeks ago, we had a contest between the Greens and Plaid. It does make you wonder how much longer Labour can keep on saying, look, the answer to our electoral troubles is to persuade voters that they don't want reform and therefore you need to vote for us. It's beginning to look as though that the menu of options that voters think they have before them is rather more wide-ranging than that strategy is going to be able to continue to be sustained.
Yeah, and that's what makes this by-election so fascinating. For the moment, thank you very much, John Curtis. Well, our political editor Chris Mason is posting on the BBC News website. I'm going to read a post that he's written because it's quite interesting. He said a Labour MP has texted him saying everyone knew the only chance to beat both the Greens and Reform was Andy Burnham. Keir clearly thought he would look tough blocking him, but with the disastrous few weeks and terrible policy across a number of areas, we've managed to isolate not only our base, but the broad coalition we rely on to win elections. The MP continues, Keir needs to own this. He's out of chances. You can't claim to be the party of unity when you're adopting the divisive policies of Reform. Vote Labour to stop Reform rings hollow when you are mimicking them. So that post there from Chris Mason. You can scan the QR code while you continue to watch us on the BBC News channel and read more at the same time. There's more analysis and posts there. So how did we get to this point and why are the stakes so high? Well, Gorton and Denton only became a constituency after it was created after boundary changes in 2024 at the last election. But the area has had a very strong history of voting Labour. Well, this election was triggered at the end of January when the MP Andrew Gwynn announced that he was standing down on health grounds. That came almost a year after he had the Labour Party whip removed for offensive comments that he made in a private WhatsApp chat. Well, Gwynn's decision to stand down created a major political headache for the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, who personally intervened to prevent Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, from becoming the Labour candidate. Critics say this was because, as we've been discussing, Burnham is seen as a potential rival for the party's leadership. Well, there are 11 candidates who are running in this seat, but many analysts, as we've been discussing, say this comes down to a three-horse race between Reform UK, Labour and the Greens. And of course, as we've been reporting, the Green Party are telling us that they are confident they have won the seat. And as John and I were discussing, still unclear, but very interesting to note who might be second place. But of course, all of that with a massive caveat. We still don't know what the result is until we see the returning officer deliver it. Well, the stakes are high because, as we've been discussing, Keir Starmer's been under massive pressure in recent months, dealing with crisis after crisis. And so, of course, this by-election is also being seen as a key test of his premiership. And if the Greens do indeed win, there'll be lots of questions about the Prime Minister's leadership. And we already heard from that Labour MP who's been in touch with Chris Mason that there is a lot of disenchantment over the fact that he didn't pick Andy Burnham. Well, let's speak to our Greater Manchester political reporter, Kevin Fitzpatrick. Kevin, there's lots of angles to go on here, really. But let's start with the main headline, really, which is that the Greens believe they've done it.
Yeah, that does seem to be the case, and we've just had a bit of movement here, actually. The people counting the ballot papers have now finished, the desks have been effectively cleared, and some of the candidates have started to turn up. But actually, the Monster Raving Loony Party, they've been here most of the night having a good time. The Liberal Democrat turned up earlier, and in the past few minutes, Angeliki Stoyer, the Labour candidate, the one who was chosen instead of Mayor Andy Burnham, just arrived, putting up a brave face, walked in with the Deputy Leader, Lucy Powell, and then the Labour supporters here with the red rosettes quickly crowded around her to support her. So they're just over to the left of myself. And then the Conservative candidate, Charlotte Cadden, she's just arrived as well. The expectation is that Hannah Spencer, the Green candidate, and Zach Polanski, the leader, will be arriving here soon. And we've just had an announcement of the agents to go to the front. There's some discussion about checking some of the ballots. So it does appear that we are moving to the point where we are going to get the result. And as you say, all the expectations here now appear to be that it is the Green Party that have won it.
Indeed, and that would be, of course, the first time that the Greens have won a by-election. Anne, won a seat in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, absolutely. The Greens have some presence on local councils here. Hannah Spencer, the candidate, potentially the next MP, she's a councillor just down the road in Trafford. They've got 5 councillors there, but they're only the 4th largest party. In Manchester itself, they've got 3 councillors, but none of them in the constituencies in Manchester which make up this constituency. So it is a huge victory if they have managed to pull it off, to come into a place where they haven't really got an electoral history or a strong track record of getting councillors elected, to suddenly sweep away the opposition, both the Labour Party and Reform, in this by-election. And Hannah Spencer, she did have some public profile more generally beyond Trafford before this by-election took place. 2 years ago, 2024, she was the Greens' mayoral election candidate. She came 5th in that by-election, hundreds of thousands of votes behind none other than Andy Burnham, who swept to victory in that role for the 3rd time. So this really would be a huge achievement for her and for her party if they have won this as is expected.
Indeed, Kevin. I mean, you live in the area, you know the seat well. Just tell us more about the constituency of Gorton and Denton.
Well, I think a lot has been made, hasn't it, of the diversity of the constituency. It was only created 2 years ago for the general election, with some boundary changes there. And in a sense, they cobbled together 2 very different seats. You've got the areas of Denton. There's 3 council wards in Denton, which is part of Tameside. In Greater Manchester, that's predominantly white working class. You come across through Gorton into Manchester, and that's a bit more of a mix, and then you move south into Levenshulme and Burnage, and those areas are incredibly diverse. Majority Muslim population down in Levenshulme. In fact, right across the constituency, about a quarter of the population of the potential voters are of Muslim heritage, and that's where the Greens appear to have made a real impact. In Burnage, there's streets where there have been green posters up which have never been seen before. I was talking to a Labour canvasser at the weekend who'd been out in Levenshulme and said that they were going through the list of people who committed to voting Labour at the 2024 general election, and most of them had decided this time they were going to go green. Now, after that, I said, well, does that mean you're going to lose? And they thought, well, no, because that's just a pocket in support of the Greens, that generally Labour would still have the votes across Gorton and other places, even though they're expecting to lose a lot of Denton to Reform to take this seat. But it does appear that the Greens have had a bigger impact than everybody was perhaps expecting, except them themselves.
OK, Kevin Fitzpatrick, a political reporter at The Count. Thank you very much for the moment. Hopefully we'll be back with you later when we have the result. So we are watching the podium there in Manchester as we await the result in the Gorton and Denton by-election. Now, a short while ago, we heard from a Green Party source saying that the party was confident that they had won the seat. But now we have a new development, and the Green Party is now saying that it's looking like Labour are in 3rd place. And the Green Party source continues, they only have themselves to blame, they say, for failing to deliver any change in government. Voters are tired of them and are turning to what the Greens are offering. And I did speak to the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Lucy Powell, a short while ago, and I asked her if she thought that she would place 3rd, the party would place 3rd. She wouldn't want to be drawn on that, but she effectively did concede that the party had lost the by-election and also lost the argument that they were trying to convince the voters of. So now we are waiting, of course, for the result. I'm still joined in the studio by Sir John Curtis as we watch that podium with bated breath. I mean, now it really comes down to, I think there's an acceptance, although you never know until you know that the Greens may have done it. But if they are right in their assessment that Labour placed 3rd, I mean, that is really bad news for the Prime Minister, isn't it?
Yeah, if indeed it is Green 1, Reform 2, Labour 3, that is the worst possible result for the Prime Minister. It's worth bearing in mind, for example, that there are 244 Labour MPs in the House of Commons whose lead over the Greens in 2024 was less than the majority, the lead that Labour had over the Greens in Gorton and Denton back in 2024. So more than half of the Parliamentary Labour Party now have good reason to be concerned about the rise of the Greens, seemingly so. And that now is to be added on to the top of the fact that many a Labour MP has already been concerned about the possibility that they could lose their constituency to Reform. So there is now a double source of trouble, a double source of worry. Indeed, some Labour MPs must now be worrying about whether or not they would end up being third in their constituency in an immediate general election. And inevitably, this is going to raise questions in some Labour MPs' minds, and we've already heard some of this from Chris Mason, the political editor, as to whether or not Sir Keir Starmer should be remaining as their leader for much longer. Now, as we said just not so long ago, I think in practice we do now have to wait to see what happens on May the 7th and whether or not things are or not as bad for Labour as is feared. But just to give you some idea of at least what the polls are saying, that Labour could indeed come third in Wales, where equally also they've not lost since 1931. It's Labour's misfortune that there are a number of the big metropolitan councils outside of England that are traditionally outside of London that are traditional Labour territory, which voted heavily for Leave, that looked like prime Reform territory, where all the councillors up for election, Sunderland, Barnsley, and where therefore there is a risk that Labour find themselves losing very heavily, losing control, maybe even Reform gaining control. And then fascinatingly, and again perhaps even more fascinatingly in the light of tonight's result, the Greens already have a quite notable local government base in parts of London. And it's a local government base where they are potential challengers to Labour. And I think now a lot of these places that the Greens might hope to pick up in London still look like a pretty tall order. They start a long way behind Labour. But in the wake of this apparent success tonight, will that give the Greens a vital boost in the capital, which therefore means that even in the part of the UK which is now these days Labour's strongest area, it's no longer the north of England, it is London. If Labour also come a cropper in London, then the question will be, well, where is there left for Labour to be electorally prosperous, and therefore where is there for the Prime Minister to hide? Yeah, loads of questions. And of course, those May elections will be crucial. But of course, we're still waiting for a result in an election tonight. The camera's gone a bit skew-with there. Oh, no, we're back on the stage. Just a reminder, of course, if you are just tuning into this coverage, we are broadcasting across the BBC on TV, radio and online. And we are looking at the microphones and the grey backing of the screen there, as there's a podium and members of the media are gathering in front of that podium as we are waiting for the returning officer to get to the stage and of course deliver those results. We understand from our correspondent at the count that we've seen the returning officer and party agents in discussions. That can usually mean that we are closer to a result, but so far we haven't seen any of the candidates arrive yet, and of course we need them all on stage, all 11 of them, before that result can be announced. Well, a short while ago I spoke to the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Lucy Powell. She's been campaigning heavily in that seat, but she almost conceded that the party had lost the seat. It wasn't a concession interview, but it certainly felt like it in ways. Let's have a listen back.
We don't know the final result yet, but I think what is clear is that the Green Party have been able to turn out their vote more strongly this evening than we have. I think there is a very clear majority in this constituency that wanted to reject reform. We were obviously all making our differing arguments for why we were best placed to do that, and on the night, on the day, the Green Party have been able to do that, I think, more effectively than we have. But we have fought a positive campaign. We've brought hundreds of our activists out and supporters out.
Lucy Powell there speaking to me a short while ago, and the Greens say that they are confident they have won the seat, and actually they also believe that Labour has placed third in the election. But of course, as we continue to monitor that podium there in Manchester, lots of photographers and journalists, but no candidates yet, we'll only really know, of course, the result when the returning officer stands up and delivers it. Well, a short while ago, we did see the Labour candidate, Angeliki Stoyer, arrive there. You can see Lucy Powell alongside her as well, who we just played an interview with there. So candidates are starting to arrive at the count, and shortly we can expect to see them all line up, all 11 of them on the stage. Well, let's go to Manchester and join our political correspondent Jack Fenwick again, who is at the count. So, Jack, we know some candidates starting to arrive. So what do you think? A result soon?
Yeah, we've seen candidates starting to arrive. We had an announcement just a few minutes ago asking candidates to meet with the returning officer. That's usually an indication that a result is pretty clear. Is going to happen pretty shortly. So I would imagine it's probably in the next sort of 10 minutes or so that we'll get that result in terms of what we're expecting. As you say, we've got the Green Party telling us that they are very confident of a win here. That comes after Labour's Deputy Leader Lucy Powell didn't quite concede this by-election, but went about as close as you can do to conceding it without actually doing so. I mean, if that is the result, particularly if the Greens are correct when they say that they think Labour have come third in this by-election, then I think inevitably questions will start to be asked of Sir Keir Starmer about his decision not to allow Andy Burnham to be the candidate here. Andy Burnham is the Mayor of Greater Manchester. He's seen as being a very popular politician in this part of the world. I mean, I've had people from Labour, Reform and the Greens say to me in recent days that they think that Labour would have won this by-election if Andy Burnham was the candidate. That may not play out sort of in the immediate hour or two once we've got the result, but it wouldn't surprise me if that ends up being maybe not the whole story, but a big part of the story as when it comes to the Labour fallout in the next few days. Now, in terms of the Greens, if, as we expect, they do win this by-election, it will be the first time they've ever won a Westminster by-election. It'll also be the first MP that they've had in the north of England. They will say that it shows they can challenge Labour and take votes off Labour on the left. They will be hoping that this is a good sign for them going into those elections in May, particularly in London, and ahead to the next general election as well. I think one of the likely things that we'll see, if indeed the Greens have taken this, is that people within the Labour Party will call for Sir Keir Starmer to move left on certain issues. There was a bit of a hint of that when we heard from the Deputy Leader Lucy Powell. She said that Labour can't out-reform reform. I think that was effectively her saying that they've been too focused on chasing reform votes rather than those voters who are deciding between the Greens and Labour. Now, in the end, if Labour are to be believed, we are told that the sort of defining factor in this was the Greens' ability to get voters out on the day. Now, by-elections often have quite low turnouts, so it's not uncommon for a key factor to be whether or not parties can get the people who would naturally support them to get out the house, to get to the ballot boxes. If Labour are right and the Greens have simply been better at them, at doing that, maybe there'll be questions about the sort of party machinery. I mean, in recent days, Labour have said that that was the thing they were very confident about. They thought they had really good data in this area, and that sort of party machine that comes with being a traditional, well-established party like Labour would help them out. So if that's the thing that they've fallen down on, yeah, that would be quite a difficult pill to swallow for them, I think.
Indeed, Jack. Let's talk about Reform as well, because, of course, they're doing very well in the opinion polls. But it looks like, from all that we have heard so far, they haven't managed to win this seat despite that.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Lucy Powell was saying that she believes this result will show that voters have rejected Reform. I mean, if it's true that Labour will end up in third with Reform second, then I think Reform will probably use that particular statistic to push back at the likes of Lucy Powell when they're making that particular point. I mean, Reform will inevitably point to the fact that this particular seat was way down on their list of targets. As we've been speaking about throughout the morning, the constituency of Gorton and Denton has two distinct parts. Part of the constituency has a large Muslim population, lots of students. The other part of it is much more white working class, and it's that bit that Reform were really targeting. But despite the fact that it was low down on their target list of seats, they have thrown quite a lot at this. They've had a high-profile candidate. Nigel Farage has been an ever-present on the campaign trail. They've spent quite a bit of money on this election as well. So I do think that inevitably people within the party will be a bit concerned about the fact that if the result goes as expected, they haven't quite been able to get over the line here.
Yeah, I think we have now been told, Jack, that the Labour candidate we already mentioned, Angeliki Stoya, has arrived. So's Reform UK's candidate Matt Goodwin, and I think Hannah Spencer from the Greens, who is most likely to be the next MP where you are, Jack, is also due to arrive imminently. So it looks like we are ever closer to getting a result. Jack, what were the main issues on the campaign trail up there?
Well, in some ways, they've been different in different areas. So in the part of the constituency where the Greens were trying to pick up lots of votes, where there is a big student population and a large Muslim population, the issue of the war in Gaza was coming up there. Now, this campaign hasn't been without controversy. There have been accusations of racism thrown around from various different parties to the other candidates and the other campaigns. And one thing we've also seen is that the Greens put out an election video and some campaigning leaflets in Urdu. Now, that was seen as a way of sort of trying to target Muslim voters. Now, Reform in particular were very critical of that campaigning. They said that it was amounted to sectarianism. In the bit of the constituency where Reform were trying to pick up many votes, where the population is much more white working class, they were bringing up the issue of illegal immigration. Labour had been trying to pick up votes in both of those areas, and I think the one issue which has sort of gone across all of the campaigns is the cost of living. I think all three campaigns will tell you that was the main thing that they were focused on. For Labour, they had been trying to say that there are economic green shoots, that there are signs that Sir Keir Starmer's plan for the economy, plan for growth in the economy is beginning to work. For both the Greens and Reform, they were effectively saying that's not the case. People are feeling the pinch in their pockets and voters want a change. Now, of course, that change for the Greens came from the left and from Reform came from the right. And it sounds as if Labour have been squeezed by both of those arguments.
Indeed. Jack, for the moment, thank you very much. Well, we are continuing to watch that podium very closely as more people are gathering in front of it. We can see some supporters, I assume, of the Monster Raving Loony Party as well, with their very colourful hats, and of course more journalists. And we understand that the Labour candidate, Councillor Angeliki Stoya, has arrived at the count. We saw her, actually, I should say, arriving with the Deputy Labour Party leader Lucy Powell, and Angeliki Stoya and Matt Goodwin from Reform UK, we understand, has also arrived at the hall, ready for that result to come in. Hannah Spencer from the Greens, likely to be the next Member of Parliament for Gorton and Denton, not yet seen in the room. But of course, the room is filling up as we watch it closely. So we are expecting a result in the next maybe 10 or 15 minutes. So So John Curtis is still in the studio with me as we continue to chew over what might be. So what are we about to watch? We talk about by-elections as protest votes a lot of the time, but either way, this is a significant one, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, certainly to pick up the theme of the focus of being a protest vote. I mean, certainly one of the things that pollsters who've been conducting focus groups in recent weeks and months have been suggesting is that certainly so far as support for reform is concerned, and this I suspect may now also be true of the Greens, is that quite a lot of it is people saying, well, we've tried the Conservatives and they ended up making, in our view, a bit of a mess of things, and now we're trying Labour and they seem, in our view, to be making a mess of things. We're not quite sure whether or not reform could do any better, and maybe some of them have the same view about the Greens. But we might as well try give somebody else a chance, just in case they possibly can. And to that extent, at least, it might be felt to have the characteristic of a protest vote. That said, we should just remember, however, that in both cases, the vote is, I mean, to use academic language, very heavily structured. That is, it's particular kinds of people who are supporting these parties rather than protest voters across the public as in general. So the classic reform voter, older, less in the way of educational qualifications, voted for Brexit, and put all that together, they're also the section of our society that's particularly concerned about immigration. It's very, very much a niche market. The Greens, younger people, more likely to be graduates, more likely to be opposed to Brexit, tend to be quite liberal on immigration, drugs, etc., etc. So to that extent, at least, while to some degree at least, the current discontent with how we are being governed provides the circumstances in which both Reform and the Greens are able to pick up votes. The voters they're actually winning over does seem to depend very much on the particular messages that those parties are putting forward, messages which, of course, are very, very different from each other.
And messages that, in this case, are quite specific to the constituency?
Well, in this case, I mean, certainly so far as the debate about Gaza and the particular concern about Gaza for those who identify as Muslims are concerned, yes, that is particular. But again, as our correspondent was saying earlier, you know, again, the biggest debate that's going on, the biggest concern that's shared across our society is indeed the cost of living, the state of the economy. And to that extent, at least, that is something that probably many Reform and Green voters share. But it's, as it were, where do we go from here? Zach Polanski will say, well, the answer is that we need to reduce inequality in our society. We need to have a wealth tax. We need to reduce the gaps between rich and poor. Whereas Nigel Farage say, well, no, what we need to do is to, I think this is the direction in which he's going, we need to protect our economy in much the same way as Donald Trump is doing. We need to keep manufacturing in this country. And of course, we need to stop, to use his language, stop migrant workers taking jobs away from people who are already living here. Now, these are both, as it were, trying to deal with the economic circumstances which the UK find itself. But again, they're very, very different remedies.
I also wanted to ask you about the role of personality in all of this.
Yes.
It's increasingly a subject around the world, not just here in the UK.
Yes.
But what we've seen here is the decision to not pick a candidate who has a huge presence in the area and is very popular may have cost the Labour Party. And actually, someone like Hannah Spencer is arguably more of a personality potentially than Angelique Stoyer, but she's also a Labour councillor. But in the end, none of those candidates could have trumped someone like Burnham. Personality really is a big part of this, isn't it now?
Well, politics at the end of the day is the art of communication, all right? And that requires, above all, candidates who can communicate effectively to the wider public. And I think certainly, you know, this arguably is circumstantial. It isn't inevitable, but it so happens that we have leading Reform, Nigel Farage, highly charismatic, already the most influential politician in 21st century British politics. Without him, Brexit would never, I think, ever have happened. Now, more recently, Zach Polanski, much shorter political career, but again demonstrated an ability to articulate a vision and to grab people's attention, and copes, frankly, quite well with the kinds of tough questions that people like you occasionally pose to him. Why not do it have elsewhere? Well, the truth is, the complaint about Keir Starmer, I mean, voters don't necessarily hate Keir Starmer in the way that perhaps somebody like Margaret Thatcher was very much a Marmite category. But the words that come up is bland, boring, dull, all right? And that therefore he isn't somebody who excites the public, gives them a sense of somebody who's got a sense of direction, he knows where he's taking the country. Ed Davey, very good at making it splash, quite good at getting publicity. But again, some of the criticisms you'll hear about him is that, well, actually, what is the Liberal Democrat vision for Britain? And it's not clear he has the kind of charisma that, for example, Paddy Ashdown or Charles Kennedy, or indeed before them, Jeremy Thorpe had. Kemi Badenoch, well, frankly, still a work in progress. I think many people would say she's got much better at the day-to-day politics of things like Prime Minister's questions. But ultimately, as a leader, again, you've got to be able to set out a strategy and direction for your party. She has struggled with that because of the way in which Reform has been sucking votes and indeed MPs away from her. And we await to see whether or not she can do it. But at the moment, our traditional governing parties are governed by politicians, or led by politicians who are not so far particularly effective at the art of communication. And the two parties at the extremes are now led by people who are unusually talented about it. Now, how we got to here, that perhaps could be another conversation if indeed this count takes much longer. But I can think the candidates are beginning to accommodate.
Yeah, indeed.
Before
you said it's all about having someone who has vision and is not dull. Sounds like you, John. We'll be back with you in a moment. Let's go to Jack, who is at the count for us. So, Jack, the hall is filling up. It does feel like we're not too far off a result now. Have all the candidates arrived?
Yes, I think they are now all here. It's just to my right-hand side where the result will be announced. That crowd is, as you say, getting bigger, so it feels like we are pretty close to getting that result now. In terms of the story of this evening, I mean, for many hours, all three of the parties contending for this seat, Reform, Labour and the Greens, were telling us it's too close to call, it's going right down to the wire. Then the real turning point came shortly before 3 a.m. when we had both a Green Party source saying that they were confident they'd won, and that interview with the deputy leader of the Labour Party, Lucy Powell, effectively conceding the vote, or certainly saying that she thought the Greens had done a better job of getting their voters out. That really did sort of change the mood here in the room, and since then I've seen a few Labour activists looking pretty glum and a few Green activists with big broad smiles on their faces. So presumably when this result comes in, as I say, any minute, it will confirm what we have been reported as expected over the last hour or so. I mean, the other story that could sort of bubble up into something more that's been happening this evening is that this group of election observers put out a report at 10 o'clock last night, as soon as the polls closed, saying that they had seen what they said was concerningly high levels of something called family voting. Now, family voting is an election offence, and it's where when somebody is in the voting booth at the ballot box, a family member is in the booth with them with the aim of trying to influence their vote. Now, as I say, they said that they'd seen concerningly high levels. Usually when they put out these reports, they say they wait a number of weeks, but they thought that it was concerning enough to put it out straight away. Now, we did then hear from the acting returning officer, that's the official who is responsible for overseeing the smooth running of this election. They said that the people on the ground at the ballot boxes are trained to try and spot this sort of stuff. They'd had no reports that this was happening. They said that if these election observers had those concerns, as they said they had, then they should have reported it while the polls were still open to see what could be done about it. Now, we do not know exactly what's going on there. We don't know sort of what it could mean for the result, but it wouldn't surprise me if that does become a row in the next few hours. I think it's likely to be something that Reform in particular point to. Whether or not Labour go there, Lucy Powell didn't in that interview that she did just before 3 a.m. But yeah, I think it could be something that is raised, because we know that it hasn't always been sort of friendly campaign here between the candidates, so it wouldn't at all surprise me if that vibe continues.
Indeed. I mean, let's move the conversation a little bit from where you are to what might the various Labour MPs might be feeling in Westminster. I know you talked to MPs through the course of your job. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that there were some who felt that Sir Keir Starmer shouldn't be leading the party. He kind of survived that possibility. But now with this, there'll be a lot of people asking questions, won't there, in the Parliamentary Labour Party?
Yeah, there are many Labour MPs very unhappy with Sir Keir Starmer and unhappy with his leadership of the government and of the Labour Party. Now, there's a sort of core group of maybe 35 Labour MPs, seen as being very much on the left of the party, who sort of publicly talk about that a lot. But there are others who privately talk about their concerns around Sir Keir Starmer's leadership. Now, just a few weeks ago, we had that day around the whole row over Lord Mandelson. We had a day when it looked as if the Prime Minister himself might resign. Now, in the end, that didn't happen. The Cabinet rallied round him. That has certainly bought him some time. He lost his Director of Communications, his top civil servant, his Chief of Staff as well. But it did feel like that anger among backbench Labour MPs towards Sir Keir Starmer was still there, and like many of them were waiting for another moment, if you like, before they acted. Now, one of the big questions has been, if Labour were to lose this by-election, would that be the moment? Now, maybe 3 weeks ago, I would have said it felt like it might well be. I do think in the last week or so that has changed a bit. Labour MPs I speak to who don't like Sir Keir Starmer, who frankly would like to see Keir Starmer replaced with somebody else, weren't really saying that they thought this would be the moment. I think they think it's more likely to come in May if Labour perform very badly in local elections and in devolved elections in Scotland and in Wales. I mean, one of the key things that Labour MPs are thinking about when they are deciding whether or not to go over the top and criticise Sir Keir Starmer is who they want to replace him. Now, names like Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, and Angela Rayner, the former Deputy Prime Minister, have been bandied around. But I think in truth, most Labour MPs probably don't think either of those people are ready to challenge Sir Keir Starmer. Wes Streeting was seen as being the Cabinet Minister closest to Peter Mandelson. That has potential difficulties for him there. We know there are still documents to come out about Peter Mandelson's appointment as the UK's ambassador to the US. Angela Rayner is still trying to sort out her tax affairs. Remember, she resigned as Deputy Prime Minister after a row about her house and the amount of stamp duty that she'd paid. Of course, the other name that has been on many people's lips as a potential challenger to Sir Keir Starmer is Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester. But he's not an MP, so he wouldn't be able to challenge Sir Keir Starmer. Of course, he tried to stand in this election, and Sir Keir Starmer blocked him. Now, there's no sign of another seat becoming available anytime soon, but if the Prime Minister's political capital is damaged yet again tonight, as it feels like it almost definitely will be, it would be very interesting to see if he was able to prevent Andy Burnham from becoming a Labour MP again in the future if the opportunity came up.
I think we can now see some candidates arriving. Jack, I'll let you take the lead on this because you're in the room, but I do think we are starting. We're showing on the screen, certainly, some cameras going up, lots of flashes.
Yes, so I can't see the exact pictures that you're looking at. However, I'm looking to my right and I can see the Green Party's candidate Hannah Spencer and also the leader of the Green Party, Zach Polanski, are just walking through. You may see they're about to walk into the shop behind me. We'll have lots and lots of journalists and photographers and camera people crowding around them. So here is Zach Polanski and Hannah Spencer. She is, of course, expected to become the latest MP, the Green Party's first MP in the north of England, the first time that the Green Party will have won a parliamentary by-election, if indeed that does happen. They both have big, broad smiles across their faces. They've just been blocked now from my vision by all the various cameras. We can see it's an absolute scrum in there. I mean, Zach Polanski will no doubt say that this is proof that the Labour Party can be challenged from the left by his Green Party. We know that he has challenged the Labour Party on issues like the cost of living, like taxes, or also on foreign affairs issues like the war in Gaza. They will be the things that he goes against Labour on, that he criticises Sir Keir Starmer for. But as I say, the Green candidate and the Green leader looking extremely happy as they walk behind me.
I mean, unsurprising, isn't it, Jack? Because if that result is as we all expect, she will have made history.
She will have made history. As I say, the Greens have never won a parliamentary by-election before. I mean, this was a seat that Labour won with a 13,000 majority at the general election in 2024. It's not the sort of seat that the Green Party were targeting then. So the fact that they have been able to, we think, defeat both Labour and Reform is a really big moment, I think, in British politics. And as I say, I think clearly it would be very, very good for the Green Party. As far as the Labour Party are concerned, I think it would fuel calls from people like the Deputy Leader Lucy Powell for Keir Starmer to move to the left on certain issues. There is definitely a feeling within some in the Labour Party that Keir Starmer's Labour, the government, have tried to go after people who they think they're losing to Reform and have perhaps not thought as much about people who they are losing to the Green Party. Well, I think if the Greens do win as we're expecting, then it wouldn't be surprising if Labour did start to have a bit of a rethink on that.
Indeed, although if the Greens sources that you've been speaking to are correct, then Labour would be placed third behind Reform. So Reform is still very much a force in British politics as well.
Absolutely, and Reform have been pointing to and will continue to point to the fact that this is a seat that was way, way down their list of target seats. It was in the 400s, I believe, but they have thrown a lot at it. A high-profile candidate in Matt Goodwin, a former politics professor turned TV presenter on GB News. Nigel Farage has been here a lot, so although it was far down on their target list, clearly they did think they were in with a chance here. So I do think that there will be some within that party concerned that they weren't able to get over the line when they did throw so much at this. Now, of course, as we've been saying, this is a constituency with two very different parts to it. Reform were largely targeting one of those parts, the area of the constituency of Gorton and Denton, in which the majority of voters are white working class voters. So one of the things that was always going to be sort of difficult for Reform was that they were effectively only targeting sort of that one portion of the constituency. Nevertheless, what they hoped would happen is that the left-wing vote was split between the Greens and Labour and that they would come through the middle. I think those arguments around tactical voting are something that we will hear a lot about going forward. There are a number of seats in which Reform would probably admit that there will be more people voting for parties sort of broadly on the left than broadly on the right, but where they'll think they have a chance anyway because that vote could be split. Now, we've seen in this campaign both Labour and the Greens trying to pitch it as a two-horse race between them and Reform, trying to say that people who are voting to try and stop Reform should vote for them. Now, Labour are telling us this evening that the Greens did that more effectively. It sounds like we are now about to get the result here in the room. The returning officer, if you can still hear me. So that means we are now going to see the candidates gathering around the stage. We will very shortly be hearing that result. We can see that there was once Zach Polanski and Hannah Spencer had come in, some of this crowd that had been around the stage to the right of me had sort of dispersed around the room, but people have started to gather back in. I couldn't quite hear what the returning officer says, but clearly it was very, very imminent, this result. And if it's going as expected, it will confirm that the Green Party... So I think there was a candidate walking behind me that was the Green Party. So that was Hannah Spencer, the Green candidate, and also Zach Polanski, the Green leader, just walking behind me there. They are taking their place just to the right of the stage, where they will be told this result. But yeah, as I say, if it goes as we're expecting and the Greens win, it will be their first parliamentary by-election victory, their first ever MP in the north of England. I think that will sort of embolden them to say that they can win seats that they didn't previously think that they could win. The Greens had their best ever election result at the general election in 2024. They won 4 seats. Now, interestingly, 2 of those seats they won from Labour, but 2 they won. One of them was already a Green seat. 1 they won from Labour. The other 2 they actually won from the Conservatives in sort of rural areas where people are concerned about conservation and those sorts of issues. Now, some people, when Zach Polanski ran for the Green Party leadership, said that the party under him might struggle in those sorts of places, that their vote would be confined to cities with big student populations, places like Bristol, places like Brighton. But what they will say about this result is that it shows that they can win in places that previously would have been quite unexpected. And of course, the big sort of theme over all of this is the fractured nature of British politics. For many decades, we've spoken about that old two-party system of Labour and the Conservatives, but it's sort of really surprising that we've had a by-election that was seen as a 3-horse race and neither the Conservatives nor the Liberal Democrats were involved. It shows how voters are more and more willing to vote for those non-traditional parties like the Greens, like Reform. And what it means is that candidates can win elections on a much lower share of the vote than would have been the case when Labour and the Conservatives were racking up millions of votes around the country. Now, that, of course, makes it sort of difficult for any party to win majorities in general elections, and it also makes it difficult for those traditional parties, Labour and the Conservatives, to know which way to turn. Labour clearly lost votes on both the left and the right in this election, and that debate within the Labour Party about what to do about that issue will no doubt continue. Now, many feel that Sir Keir Starmer has sort of largely come down on the issue of chasing Reform voters, but there'll be massive pressure on him now to go the other way and try and chase some of those voters that they've lost to the Green Party, because, you know, undoubtedly, this is an area that for decades and decades, for generations, was an absolute Labour stronghold. For Labour to be winning general election majorities, they need to win areas like this, and that will be what is worrying party activists and MPs. So I think those are the people who will be calling for Sir Keir Starmer to move to the left. I mean, it'll be interesting exactly sort of what issues they do pick up on, whether that is issues around foreign affairs. We know that the war in Gaza has played a role in this election campaign.
Okay,
we know that there were a number of Gaza independents who won seats at the last election.
Yeah. OK, Jack, we're just going to jump in because I'm now joined in the studio while we, of course, continue to wait for that result by Baroness Jenny Jones, who is from the Green Party, represented the party in the London Assembly. You walked in with a big grin on your face, didn't you?
Obviously, I'm not taking anything for granted.
But
yes, no, I'm sick with excitement. I couldn't sit down upstairs in reception because I couldn't sit down from huge joy.
I mean, this is you know, if it's to be the case, we'll hear from the returning officer imminently, of course, a massive moment for your party.
I think it's absolutely seismic, not only for our party, which shows that we can win in some quite diverse areas, but also for the political landscape here in Britain. It will mean a lot for us because we've got local elections coming up. We've got the Senedd elections in Cardiff. I think it will have an impact on those. We will do better than even we expected to do. And yeah, I'm really excited.
Was this a win for the Greens, or was this a protest vote against Labour?
Well, the fact is, politics in Britain has changed so massively, and I think what one hears on doorsteps and in market squares and so on is that people want change. They're not happy with the way things are run at the moment. They want change, and so I think Reform offered them the option of change, but now the Green Party is offering an option of change as well. And our message is very, very different. We are talking about hope and not about hate, and I think, was that a snort from you?
Can I ask you, though,
yes,
about your message? Because there's been some criticism about some of the leaflets that you handed out. I think we can put some up on the screen as well, just to show our viewers. But some of those leaflets targeting certain religious groups, and there are parties like Reform who've accused the Greens of sectarianism.
One of the things you do as a party in opposition is you challenge the party that's in power at the moment, and I think that's what we did, and I think we did it very successfully. I sat for 12 and a half years in the House of Lords on the opposition benches, and at the moment I've watched 11 years of Tories, a year and a half of Labour, and sometimes it's very hard to tell the difference. People wanted change, and we actually told it the way it was.
What was the benefit or the purpose of having a picture of Prime Minister Starmer and Narendra Modi on there, or David Lammy and Benjamin Netanyahu? What message were you trying to send there?
Well, I can't answer the local party who did those leaflets, but I would say what we were doing was highlighting the way that Labour is working. And that's our job, surely. It's a case of, I mean, it's not, those were not fake pictures, they were real pictures of real incidents, and we reported them just to make it clear.
I'd just say again, there are some people who say that you were just trying to appeal to certain religious groups, and therefore that does amount to sectarianism.
Listen, you have to work with everybody in a constituency, and the fact is that we reached out to all sorts of groups, and it's apparently paid off.
Indeed, we'll find out in a few moments. We're still watching that podium very closely. We've seen the candidates arrive, including your candidate, of course, Jenny, but they're not yet on the stage. And of course, when we see them on the stage and the returning officer, that's when we know the moment is imminent. So let's stay chatting. Again, just staying on the themes that you focused on in that constituency, like the issue of Gaza, particularly a resonant message for the many Muslim voters in the constituency. Can that translate nationally?
Well, I think what we did was we looked at the constituency, we saw that there were some very, very different communities, and Hannah has spoken to all those communities. It's not only to the Muslim community. And as your reporter said earlier, our wins at the previous general election were actually quite, 2 rural constituencies, 2 urban constituencies. The fact is our message is getting through on all sorts of levels now. We're actually appealing to a much wider audience, because we're not only talking about green issues, and I do talk a lot about green issues, we're talking about the cost of living, we're talking about social equality, we're talking about a fairer society, and that's the sort of message people want to hear.
Sir Keir Starmer criticised your party, saying the Green Party's policy isn't just irresponsible, it's reprehensible, legalising cocaine, heroin, ketamine and the date-rape drug GHB, a drug which is known in use to spike drinks for women. He said that policy would shatter lives and increase antisocial behaviour.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer was clearly being desperate, attacking us like that. The fact is, all of our policies are very carefully considered. We don't just make them up when we come into TV studios. We actually have expert advice, and we also cost them properly. At the last general election, we had a fully costed manifesto, which most parties didn't have, and we stick by our promises. We actually, on the issue of drugs, this is an issue that has blighted British society, for millennia probably. And the fact is we need to deal with it better. The way that we're dealing with it at the moment, that's the supply of recreational drugs and much harder drugs are through criminal gangs. That's not desirable. We need to change the pattern. We need to find a way out, and we want to build up the NHS so that it can cope.
Yes, we'll carry on with that conversation in a moment, but let's listen into the returning officer. It's a big moment, of course, for your party, but let's have a listen in and see what the returning officer has to say, Jenny.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but the returning officer's on the platform. We're about to get the declaration.
Okay, thank you very much, colleagues. Can I just start this evening by offering an enormous thanks to all of the staff from both Manchester City Council and Tameside Council who have worked on the count this evening and diligently through our polling stations in both local authority areas throughout the day. You are the heroes of local democracy, and we thank you very much for all of your efforts and your accuracy in the count. Can I also just remind people as well of what I said at the beginning of proceedings this evening, which is that it is very important in law that the declaration of the result of the poll is heard in full, and I need to make sure that that is achieved this evening. Thank you. So for the UK parliamentary by-election held on the 26th of February 2026, this is the declaration of the result of the poll. I, Tom Stannard, the acting returning officer for the Gorton and Denton constituency, give notice that the total number of votes cast for each candidate was as follows. Jones, Sean, Ian, Alec, the official Monster Raving Loony Party, 159. Buckley, Brendan Nicholas, Advance UK, 154. Cadden, Charlotte Ann, Conservative Party candidate, 706. Clark, Daniel David, Libertarian Party UK, 47. Goodwin, Matthew Thomas James, Reform UK, 10,578. Moore, Sebastian, Social Democratic Party, 46. Meg Hare, Joseph Bernard, the Rejoin EU Party, 98. Piercy, Jacqueline, Liberal Democrats, 653. Spencer, Hannah Catherine, the Green Party, 14,980. Stoya Angeliki, Labour Party, 9,364. And Wills Hugo, Communist League, 29. The total number of valid votes cast was 36,814, and the number of ballot papers rejected was as follows. Want of official mark, 0. Voting for more than one candidate, 28. Writing or mark by which the voter could be identified, 0. And being unmarked or void for uncertainty, 62. That makes the total number of rejected ballot papers 90. The total number of ballot papers verified as returned was 36,904, and the percentage turnout was therefore 47.62%. So I hereby declare that Hannah Catherine Spencer is duly elected Member of Parliament for the Gorton and Denton constituency.
So there you have it, the Green Party making history, winning their first parliamentary by-election. Let's hear from Hannah Spencer.
Bear with me, because this is a lot. I didn't grow up wanting to be a politician. I'm a plumber. And 2 weeks ago, during all this, I also qualified as a plasterer. Because even in chaos, even under pressure, I get things done. I am no different to every single person here in this constituency. I work hard. That is what we do. Except things have changed a lot over the last few decades, because working hard used to get you something. It got you a house, a nice life, holidays. It got you somewhere. But now, working hard, what does that get you? Because talk to anyone here and they will tell you. The people who work hard but can't put food on the table, can't get their kids' school uniforms, can't put their heating on, can't live off the pension they worked hard to save for, can't even begin to dream about ever having a holiday, ever. Because life has changed. Instead of working for a nice life, we're working to line the pockets of billionaires. We are being bled dry. And I don't think it's extreme or radical to think working hard should get you a nice life. And I don't think that if you're not able to work, that you should still have a nice life. I think that absolutely everybody should get a nice life. And clearly, I'm not the only person who thinks that, because I've made clear my position and my commitment to working class communities, the community that I am from. People in their thousands told me on the doorsteps and at the ballot box that what we are sick of is being let down and looked down on, that we are sick of our hard work making other people rich. I lived in this constituency at one of the most difficult and challenging periods of my life. I saw how strong the community was at holding things together. But I saw how much harder life is when the things around you are broken. The litter, the fly tipping, the dirty air. And when I moved, it became even clearer, and this is why I am fighting for the community that I lived in and that I still work in. Because I absolutely refuse to accept that we should ever have to move and leave our communities for good schools, a thriving high street and clean air. And I will not accept a society where having more money gets you a longer life expectancy. And so when it came to fighting for people here to stand in this election, well, how could I not fight? Because here, this is what we do. We fight for each other in this very diverse constituency, where our struggles might not always be the same, but where we know how hard life can be, and we stick together. Whatever our beliefs, our backgrounds, our colour, or our level of education, we stick up for each other. And to those who voted for me, I know that earning your trust starts now. One vote on one night is not something I will take for granted or assume will happen again. I will earn your trust. And to those who didn't vote for me, I will always work hard for you, and I will always be honest, and I will always be decent. To our Muslim communities who this week suffered an attempted attack during Ramadan, whilst I was being welcomed by women at a mosque in Longsight, someone just down the road walked into a mosque carrying an axe. And whilst we were gathered and eating together, an act of terror could easily have taken place. And I can't and won't accept this victory tonight without calling out the politicians and divisive figures who constantly scapegoat and blame our communities for all the problems in society. My Muslim friends and neighbours are just like me, human. And of course, to our white working class communities, the background that I have become so proud to be from, we know how it feels to be looked down on, maybe because we didn't do well at school, maybe because we do dirty manual jobs, because we are shut out of places we should be in. To people here in Gorton and Denton who feel left behind and isolated, I see you and I will fight for you. Because whilst our communities may sometimes be labelled in different ways, the thing everyone seems to have underestimated here, especially over the last few weeks, is how similar we all actually are. How we have common ground, how we get along, how we stand up for each other. The cracks that were starting to show can be healed, and I believe that it is through offering people hope and a chance to do things differently and do things better. Now, to my customers, I'm sorry, but I think I might have to cancel the work that you had booked in because I'm heading to Parliament. And when I get there, I will make space for everyone doing jobs like mine. We will finally get a seat at the table. And to Layla, the little girl who I had the pleasure of meeting and holding this week. I promised you I would try and improve the world that you are growing up in. I told you that I am not perfect, but that I always try my best. I always try and do the right thing. Now, something exciting is definitely happening. And I invite you all to be part of it. Come and join the Green Party so that we can spread hope and win everywhere across the country. Our strength will grow as more and more of us come together. We have shown that we don't have to accept being turned against each other. We can demand better without hating each other. We can do that together. We ran a hopeful campaign backed by thousands of volunteers and activists. We defeated the parties of billionaire donors. We have shown that we don't have to accept being turned against each other at all. And we did this with the people who live here, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, just as we have always done in this constituency and in the whole of Greater Manchester. Because this is Manchester. and we do things differently here. Thank you so much to everybody. Thank you.
So those remarks from Hannah Spencer, the MP for Gorton and Denton now. She won with a significant majority. She got 14,980 votes, so the Green Party winning that seat. But I think another crucial point to make is that Reform UK took second place. Matt Goodwin got 10,578 votes, and the Labour candidate Angeliki Stoya came third, 9,364 votes. A very personal speech there from Hannah Spencer, a plumber. She said that she just qualified in plastering, but apologised to all her customers because now she's going to be quite busy as a Member of Parliament. She set out how she wants to reduce inequality when she goes to Parliament, and thanked all of those who voted for her. I mean, a truly remarkable night for the Green Party. Their first by-election win and their first seat in the northwest of England as well. And we're just watching the pictures there. A warning that there is some flash photography as well. You can see these images here of Hannah embracing Zach Polansky, the leader of the Green Party. I think there's no doubt that he really has transformed the party since he took over as leader, really given it a new sense of energy. And now they have won that by-election, and I think there's lots of things we're going to unpack with my guests in the studio, but I think one of the most remarkable things really is the third placing for Labour. Let's have a listen in.
Hannah, you're live on Sky News.
Oh,
Congratulations.
No. We're going to move on. Awkward. Let's go to Jack Fennick, who is at the count. So, Jack, we heard from Hannah Spencer from the Greens. As John Curtis described it earlier, she has written her place in the history books, hasn't she?
Well, we're live on BBC News, Regini, and she has written her place in the history books. As we've been saying, the first Green Party MP in the north of England, the first time that the Greens have won a parliamentary by-election. And for me, the most astonishing thing about that result is that despite the fact we've been saying for much of the night that it was too close to call, it wasn't really close at all. She won by more than 4,000 votes. She was more than 5,000 votes ahead of the Labour candidate. This is a resounding victory for the Green Party, and not the sort of thing that even their campaigners were saying they were expecting in recent days. Now, as we've talked about, there are different parts to this constituency. The Greens mainly targeted the part of the constituency where there is a large Muslim population, where there are lots of students. But interestingly enough, one Green Party source said to me yesterday that they'd gone into this campaign thinking that there would be very few people who were sort of swing voters between Reform and the Greens. But they said actually they'd been surprised at how many of potential Reform voters were being won over by the Green Party's message on the cost of living. A Green Party source said to me about an hour ago that there was early evidence that they had done much better than anticipated in the part of the constituency that they thought would vote heavily for Reform. So we will learn in the next hour or so what exactly the sort of breakdown was of results, and it may be that they did better than they expected in that area, as well as doing very well in the area that they'd been targeting most. Now, in terms of that speech that we've just heard from Hannah Spencer, it was very much a speech in the mould of the Green Party of Zach Polansky, in that she spoke a lot about the cost of living, about billionaires and the rich, and hardly spoke at all about green issues. There was a little bit of talk about clean air, but beyond that, no green issues came up there at all. It was all about the cost of living and billionaires, saying that they defeated the parties of billionaire donors. That is rhetoric that we've heard a lot from the Green Party since Zach Polanski became leader, when he ran on a platform to talk more about that and less about green issues. Some within the party said that he was restricting the sort of seats that they could win, that they would only be able to do well in left-leaning cities that had lots of students in them, places like Bristol, like Brighton, like parts of London. Well, he may well have put that argument to bed by winning this seat in Gorton and Denton. No doubt he will continue to push the Labour government from the left of British politics. I think that will be uneasy for Sir Keir Starmer, but as I say, a massive victory for the Greens.
Jack will be with you in a moment again, but I want to get the thoughts of my studio guests now. Jenny, we'll come to you in a minute, but John Curtis, let's get your analysis.
Well, in the end, there was a surprise, as Jack has already implied, and the surprise is the scale of the Greens' victory. They've actually managed to win nearly 41% of the votes cast in this constituency. They have a 12-point lead over Reform. So rather than being this narrow contest that we thought perhaps somebody might win with a relatively low share of the vote, the Reforms have well and truly won this constituency and getting the kind of share of the vote that we thought was getting rather difficult to get in our fragmented politics. So I think the truth is that the Greens have to be congratulated on what is a quite remarkable performance. That, of course, just simply makes life for Keir Starmer even worse. It's not just that Labour have lost, they've lost badly. They trail the Greens by 15 points, Labour themselves running in third place. So I think the idea that perhaps we were hearing from the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party a few hours ago that, you know, the Greens can't really pose that much threat of a Labour more broadly beyond this constituency, I think there's going to be time for Labour Party to begin to rethink this, because the Greens here at least have demonstrated a remarkable ability to be able to corral a substantial section of this constituency.
Jenny, we'll come to you in a second, but I want to pick up on what you were saying, because there was a thought several hours ago that this could be so close it might even come down to a recount. We looked at the polls, they were saying it was on a knife edge. This is nothing of the sort. No, it's nothing of a knife edge. This is a very clear, decisive victory. By my quick calculation, for example, it is the 13th biggest fall ever in Labour's share of the vote. Labour's share of the vote has essentially been halved as compared with 2024. It's down by nearly 25 points. It is amongst the top 10 biggest Labour percentage majorities ever to be overturned in a by-election. Well, we'll come to you in a minute, Jenny, but let's go to the winning candidate. Jack, you've got Hannah with you.
Jack, we'll start here.
Yep, I'm joined by Hannah Spencer, Westminster's newest MP. Hannah, you won by more than 4,000 votes in the end. What do you make of that result?
Yeah, I think it's really clear here that people are ready for something different. We're rejecting the political parties that have always shut us out, and we're rejecting the political parties that are funded by billionaires and who have vested interests. It's really clear that people here today have decided to vote for someone like me, who is actually just pretty normal.
The Labour Deputy Leader Lucy Powell said that the Greens did a better job of being an alternative to Reform. Why do you think that is?
To be honest, I don't think. I think so much of this is sort of the other political parties. I think aren't really understanding what has happened these last few weeks, and all we have done is go out and talk to people and listen to people, and that was really clear from the start of the campaign that people, when they were telling us their concerns and they realised I was actually listening and really wanting to come up with a way of finding solutions, that cut through to people, and it's something that political parties have not done here. They have taken people's votes for granted, and when we came along and showed a positive and hopeful way of doing politics differently, people clearly decided that that's what they wanted.
In your speech just now, lots of talk about the cost of living, lots of talk about billionaires, hardly any talk about green issues. What does the Green Party stand for now?
The Green Party stands really clearly and firmly with social justice values. Of course, that includes the climate crisis, but it includes everything that everyday people struggle with, and that is the cost of living, and it is the NHS, and of course it's about fly tipping, as I mentioned, the environment around us in my speech, like those everyday issues that really affect people, that can be fixed, but that politicians for too long have ignored.
Some of your opponents accused you of sectarianism during this campaign. They pointed to leaflets and campaign videos in Urdu. What do you say to those claims?
I think all of us know what it feels like to be shut out of a system that isn't built for us, and I will always go out of my way to try and include people who may be struggling to access something. And I'm really proud that we were just different, and we showed people that we were going to try and reach them if they'd been let down by other politicians. And I really hope that the other political parties will take some lessons from this.
But there were, as I say, these claims of sectarianism. For example, there were pictures of Sir Keir Starmer with Narendra Modi. I mean, why was that used?
I've just been out every day talking to people, listening to people, and when people weren't able to access information in a way that other people might, like, we tried to learn from that and tried to give literature and information in a language that they speak, and yeah, I'm really proud that we did that.
So would you reject those claims of sectarianism?
Yeah, I think I'm really firm that we just did what all politicians should be doing, going out into communities and listening to people.
Sir Keir Starmer has hit out at Green Party policies around legalising drugs, around wanting to withdraw from NATO, some of your economic policies. What would you say in response to him?
So I think, again, it just shows where they're really out of touch, because when we were on the doorsteps talking and the drugs, for example, came up, people were telling us the impact of having criminal drugs networks in our communities. And so when we were able to offer something different, a different way of doing things, in a way that includes people and involves a conversation, again, that resonated with people.
So you think legalising hard drugs is the right way to go?
I think we need to look at doing the system differently, because the drugs laws that we've had for nearly 60 years are failing.
And what sort of issues will you be trying to push the Labour government on when you take up your seat in Westminster?
Cost of living, because that is far too high here. We've got higher than average rates of child poverty. We've got higher than average rates of fuel poverty. We've got too many people living in insecure rented accommodation. And I know that we can push the Labour government to be better and stronger and faster. So by nationalising some of our energy companies and water companies, bringing them back into public hands because privatisation has failed. And I know that having a Green MP, the pressure of those Green MPs holding Labour to account, I think we'll achieve something better.
The early part of this campaign was dominated by a row over whether Andy Burnham would be allowed to stand for Labour. Many people within the Labour Party think that he would have beat you. Do you think he would have beat you?
Honestly, with the results tonight, who knows? Like, I think maybe if you'd have asked me that 4 or 5 weeks ago, I might have given a slightly different answer. But from going out and speaking to thousands of people, I don't even know if that would have been enough to save them, because what is really clear throughout this is that people have felt so let down and ignored by a Labour Party that since they got into government has just constantly ignored and failed people.
This is now the Green Party's 5th seat in Parliament. What is the party trying to do? Labour say that you can not possibly form a government yourselves, and therefore the more seats you get, the more likely it is that Reform will form the next government.
But I think they're just showing their naivety, really, in what can be achieved. And I know in my role as a councillor, like, I'm not new to politics. I've been a councillor for 3 years, and I've seen the impacts there of just being in the room when decisions are made. Like, you can work cross-party on things that you agree with, and you can push other people into a better direction, and you can only do that if you have people like us there.
But they're right, though, aren't they? Isn't it the case that the more Green MPs there are, in a way, Reform might be quite happy about that?
I don't know, maybe you'd need to ask Reform that.
Hannah Spencer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we heard there from the Green Party's newest MP, Hannah Spencer, clearly talking about the cost of living. That was a major issue during this campaign, and it's quite obvious that the Green Party are going to try and challenge Labour from the left. As we've been saying all evening, that could get quite awkward for Sir Keir Starmer. It may mean that people within his party want him to move left on those issues. I think what we're also likely to see is that the sort of rhetoric from figures like Sir Keir Starmer and others in the Labour Party towards the Greens is likely to ramp up as well. It wouldn't at all surprise me if that is something we see, where they've previously focused on attacking Reform. We now see them attacking the Greens as well.
OK, Jack, thank you so much for the moment. If you manage to grab any of the losing candidates, then we'll come back to you as well. But let's chew over that result with my 2 studio guests, of course, Professor Sir John Curtis, our resident election expert, and Baroness Jenny Jones of the Green Party. Jenny, I'm going to give you the opportunity to respond now, because we saw that result, as John was saying. it's a much bigger win for your party than was expected. So let's just get raw emotion. How are you feeling?
I have been feeling very emotional, especially listening to Hannah. She's going to be an absolutely brilliant MP. And I think she's made the point that she went out and she talked to the people, and not just talked to them, but she listened to them. And constituents really want that from an MP, and I think Labour has probably taken advantage of constituents, not listened to them, and it's payback.
Is this a win that you think you can translate nationally? I mean, as we know, you have a handful of seats. There will be many who will be watching this and saying, yeah, this is a by-election. This isn't going to translate to a general election. What would you say to them?
I think it'll translate into a lot of different elections for us. I mean, the fact is we had glimpses for the past 2 weeks about whether or not we would win this, and we went all for it. And it just shows this whole tired trope of, oh, a green vote's a wasted vote is absolutely wrong. And somebody did make the point about our 4 constituencies, 2 are rural constituencies, 2 are urban constituencies. This is just expanding our reach, and people can now see that we can win.
Do you think Zach Polanski's got a lot to be thanked for as well? How has he, in your view, changed the party?
Well, I think there's two things that have happened. First of all, winning those 4 seats at the general election 18 months ago gave the whole party a lift. And Zach Polanski coming in as leader has meant that his focus has been taking the challenge to reform on their territory. There was the question about why didn't Hannah mention the environment and green stuff. The fact is, environmental stuff, green stuff comes into absolutely everything. If we don't get the economy right, we will have climate collapse. If we don't make sure that people have healthy lives, then the country will be much worse for it. So the climate, environmental stuff comes into everything, and that's what we put into our policies.
I know we talked about it before the result, but Hannah was asked about it again. Do you think there are lessons that could be learnt, though, about the way the campaign was run to avoid those accusations that it was sectarian in the way that it wasn't a leaflet, actually? I think it was the images that we showed earlier from a video. But people criticised that and said it was targeting certain religious groups. Do you think there are lessons that can be learnt?
Well, that is down to our national party. I would argue that when you're in opposition and you present what the government is doing, then that is fair enough. You know, if they are responsible for certain things, you have to highlight it. And I mean, to be fair to this Labour government, they are doing some good things, but they are really bad at telling us they're doing those good things. And so they're absolutely rubbish overall. People wanted a change in Gorton and Denton, and now they've got it, and I think they're going to have a superb MP in Hannah.
John, you're busy typing away, which means you're crunching those numbers. What more can you tell us about what you're finding out?
Well, here's a couple of statistics, as it were, to send a certain amount of good reason for worry on both the Conservative and Labour benches. If you take the fact that there's a 26.2% swing from Labour to the Greens in this by-election, it's not a record swing in a by-election, but it is a pretty high swing. And you apply that to every constituency in the country. And of course, this is a by-election. As Peter Snow would say at this stage of the night, it's a little bit of fun. But there are literally 399 Labour constituencies that the Greens could pick up from Labour on this kind of swing. So that's good reason for Labour worry. Reason for the Conservatives to worry, they got 1.9% of the vote, which I've quickly looked it up. That is their worst ever performance in a by-election, and evidently what was left in history, what was left of the Conservative vote in the constituency was certainly gobbled up by Reform. So these are truly very poor results, both for Labour and for the Conservatives. The future of British politics now looks more uncertain than it has done at any stage since 1945.
And we talked about the Conservatives and the Lib Dems. I mean, in a way, does this confirm the conversation we were having a few hours ago that we're now entering a 5-party system in a way? Well,
I think certainly now one of the questions we'll be looking out for in the polls in the coming weeks is whether or not this does anything to enhance the Greens' popularity and credibility in the eyes of the electorate, and that their current roughly 14% in the opinion polls goes up at all. If it does, then they will be beginning to compete with the Conservative and the Labour Party for the position of the second party in the UK. Now, we don't know whether that's going to happen. You know, maybe this is a one-day wonder and it won't have that much impact. But certainly now we're looking to see whether or not the Greens can begin to pose the kind of challenge to Labour and to the Conservative Labour duopoly that Reform have already been posing during the course of now virtually a year.
And just very briefly, Jenny, I mean, in many ways, the issue of Gaza was front and centre at this, but do you think your party can translate your other policies on a national argument?
Well, I think now we have a bigger platform and we can say more about our other policies, and it will be an opportunity for us to, I think, explain ourselves and be heard. So John here said an uncertain future. I would say it's an exciting future.
Okay, Jenny and John, you'll still be with us. I'm just going to go through the results again, that final vote tally. The Green Party, 14,980. Reform UK came second with 10,578 votes. Labour placed third, as John was saying, not a great result for the Labour Party, who'd held that seat in different iterations for decades. They got 9,364. Also not good for the Conservatives, who placed fourth with just 706 votes. And the Liberal Democrats, 653. I'll keep going because it's important to go through all of them. The Monster Raving Loony Party, 159. Advance UK, 154. Rejoin the EU at 98. The Libertarian Party, 47. The Social Democratic Party, 46. And the Communist League, 29. The total number of votes cast in that election, 36,814. And the voter turnout was 47.62%. But the real headline really is that this morning the Green Party of England and Wales have made history by winning their first ever parliamentary by-election. So Hannah Spencer is now the Member of Parliament for Gorton and Denton. And not a great night for the Labour Party, who had held that seat with a healthy majority. They ended up in third place behind Reform UK, who got second place with over 10,000 votes. There's plenty more, of course, online, and we're continuing our coverage here as well. Live from London, this is BBC News.
So I hereby declare that Hannah Catherine Spencer is duly elected Member of Parliament for the Gorton and Denton constituency.
I didn't grow up wanting to be a politician. I'm a plumber. And 2 weeks ago, during all this, I also qualified as a plasterer. Because even in chaos, even under pressure, I get things done.
The Green Party wins the Gorton and Denton by-election, their first ever Westminster by-election win. Reform comes second, with Labour third. Hillary Clinton says she has no information on any crimes committed by the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and calls for President Trump to take the stand. And coming up, Netflix drops its bid for Warner Brothers, paving the way for a Paramount takeover. Hello and welcome to BBC News. I'm Regina Vaidinarvan. The Green Party have won the Gorton and Denton by-election. It's their first ever Westminster by-election victory in what's traditionally considered a safe Labour Party seat. Well, Hannah Spencer becomes a new MP in an election where Reform UK came second. Labour's candidate finished third place. Well, this was the moment that the win for the Green Party was announced.
So I hereby declare that Hannah Catherine Spencer is duly elected Member of Parliament for the Gorton and Denton constituency.
Let's have a listen to some of what Hannah Spencer had to say right after her victory was announced.
I didn't grow up wanting to be a politician. I'm a plumber. And 2 weeks ago, during all this, I also qualified as a plasterer. Because even in chaos, even under pressure, I get things done. I am no different to every single person here in this constituency. I work hard. That is what we do. Except things have changed a lot over the last few decades, because working hard used to get you something. It got you a house, a nice life, holidays. It got you somewhere. But now, working hard, what does that get you? Because talk to anyone here and they will tell you. The people who work hard but can't put food on the table, can't get their kids' school uniforms, can't put their heating on, can't live off the pension they worked hard to save for, can't even begin to dream about ever having a holiday, ever. Because life has changed. Instead of working for a nice life, we're working to line the pockets of billionaires. We are being bled dry. And I don't think it's extreme or radical to think working hard should get you a nice life. And I don't think that if you're not able to work, that you should still have a nice life. I think that absolutely everybody should get a nice life. And clearly, I'm not the only person who thinks that, because I've made clear my position and my commitment to working class communities, the community that I am from. People in their thousands told me on the doorsteps and at the ballot box that what we are sick of is being let down and looked down on, that we are sick of our hard work making other people rich. I lived in this constituency at one of the most difficult and challenging periods of my life. I saw how strong the community was at holding things together. But I saw how much harder life is when the things around you are broken. The litter, the fly tipping, the dirty air. And when I moved, it became even clearer, and this is why I am fighting for the community that I lived in and that I still work in. Because I absolutely refuse to accept that we should ever have to move and leave our communities for good schools, a thriving high street and clean air. And I will not accept a society where having more money gets you a longer life expectancy.
That's Hannah Spencer, who has made history as the Green Party Member of Parliament for Gorton and Denton. It's the Green Party's first ever parliamentary by-election win. Well, let's show you the final vote tally. We can put that up on the screen for you. Well, the Green Party, Hannah Spencer, got 14,980 votes. In second place, Reform UK with 10,578. And in third place, the Labour Party with 9,364. Real blow for the party, who held that seat with a double-digit majority in the last general election. Well, I'm joined in the studio by Sir John Curtis, Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University, and also Green Party peer Jenny Jones. It's good to have you both still with us. Jenny, we're going to start with you. An incredible night for your party. Were you imagining a win of this magnitude?
No, absolutely not. I mean, we'd heard that it could be 200 or 300 votes in it, and we felt moderately confident, but it's very difficult to know for sure. This is seismic. It's seismic for the party, for the Green Party, but also for British politics, I think. It is showing that we are moving out of this two-party system that's been really constraining policy and development and government generally into something much more modern. And I will never get tired of hearing Hannah Spencer as Gorton and Denton MP. That is a fantastic phrase.
Still a small number, a handful of MPs in Parliament. I guess the question is how you can translate a win in a by-election where it was fought on very specific issues like Gaza to getting a better national picture.
Well, of the 4 seats that we have already in Parliament, 2 are in rural constituencies and 2 are in urban constituencies. So I think we're proving we can win everywhere. We have to listen to the people who are in the constituency. We have to make sure that we are clear on our policies that will help them. But I think this is the start of more wins.
I have to ask you this because there were some people who criticised the campaign by the Green Party in the constituency, accusing it of being sectarian because various videos and literature targeted particular religious groups, and it was accused of being divisive.
Well, I don't think that's true. I think that we talked about what we have been doing on various issues, and we talked about what the government had been doing on various issues. And so I think it's clear we were opposing what the government had done, and that's what opposition does.
There's been a lot made of Zach Polansky and how he's changed the party. We saw him at the count there with Hannah. How much do you credit him to transforming the party's fortunes? And do you think he's got a lot to be thanked for?
I think that Zach's done an incredible amount. I mean, he's been building on the 4 seats that we won 18 months ago in the general election. And quite honestly, he has given us an incredible boost. And this is an example of it. And I think it's shown that we can win anywhere, that our policies are good enough to appeal to everybody. What we targeted in this election was the politics of hope and not the politics of hate. And I think that resonates throughout the country.
5 in the morning here. We're going to let you go now. How are you going to celebrate?
Well, I'll probably go to bed.
That's a good celebration. Thank you very much for joining us, Jenny Jones, Baroness Jones there from the Green Party. Well, in a moment we will hear from our elections expert, Sir John Curtis. But first, let's speak to Chief Political Commentator for The Times, Patrick Maguire. Patrick, I don't know if you've woken up early or stayed up late, but either way, thanks for joining us here on BBC News. What are your thoughts on this win for the Greens?
Look, it's remarkable. I think it changes the entire psychological climate of not just progressive politics, but English politics, full stop. This is the worst possible result for the Labour Party, coming in third in one of their 40 safest seats, not just behind Reform, but behind the Greens. And really, what Keir Starmer needed last night or this morning, was a result which showed that progressives still had to vote for the Labour Party to beat Reform. We know from the margin of victory, the margin of victory is big enough that it shows you actually even that warning, about, even warnings about having a racist MP, as the Labour Party was calling it, all the attacks on green drug policy did nothing. They still lost by 4,000 votes. The Greens won 40% of the vote. It's a remarkably good result for the Greens and a remarkably bad one for the Labour Party.
I mean, it's a question I put to Lucy Powell earlier in the night, but do you think things would be different? Would we be telling a different story if Andy Burnham had been the candidate for Labour?
Yes, right now we'd be saying Andy Burnham's been elected MP. It is as simple as that. And the Labour Party has wasted a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of political capital, and perhaps its only remaining card with the voters who've abandoned it by stopping Andy Burnham from running, because it is as simple as this. Voters quite like Andy Burnham, progressive voters really like Andy Burnham, voters in Manchester love Andy Burnham, and voters everywhere hate Keir Starmer. It is as simple as that, and we are seeing proof of concept that voters do not like Keir Starmer, and that Keir Starmer is tanking the Labour Party brand again and again and again. And you'll get no more spectacular proof than Labour coming third in one of its safest seats, not only behind Reform, but 4,000 votes behind the Green Party, who really had no right to be in contention in the seat. Ditto Reform. Reform didn't really have any right to be spoken of as a winner here. This is the sort of seat that is the bedrock of Labour's coalition, and we've seen it in quite spectacular fashion be torn in 3 directions. And there is no way to put a good gloss on this result.
And very briefly, Patrick, you talked to a lot of members of the Parliamentary Labour Party. Have you heard from any since this result? What's the mood there?
Look, the mood was bad already. The Prime Minister is not going to be kicked out of office today because of this, but this massively increases the chances of instability in the medium term. And it is, again, proof of concept for those who think the only way for the party to survive is to change the leader. OK,
thank you very much, Patrick Maguire. Well, let's stay on that story and get the thoughts of the BBC's election expert, Professor Sir John Curtis. You've been number crunching, you've got your laptop, you've got your books. What is your big thought on this result?
Well, I think for those people who've not been watching us all night but have woken up this morning, I think we should say not only have the Greens recorded their first ever parliamentary by-election victory, they have done so in quite spectacular fashion. Rather than this being a relatively narrow victory with perhaps nobody getting much more than 30% of the vote, the Greens have ended up with 41% of the vote. They have registered one of the biggest swings against Labour, and a seat that Labour has been trying to defend. I think it's around number 10 in that list. Therefore, also with Labour, in fact, ending up in third place. I think the idea that we were still hearing from the Labour Party just 2 hours ago that, this was simply a by-election success and it would be difficult for the Greens to replicate it elsewhere. Well, sure, we can't necessarily say the Greens are going to do brilliantly everywhere all of a sudden. But I think it's certainly underlined the message of the polls that while, yes, indeed, Labour has been losing around 1 in 8 of its supporters to reform across the country as a whole, the polls have been suggesting that actually the party's been losing twice as many voters either to the Greens or to the Democrats. And that therefore Labour, insofar as they've been trying to focus on reform and attacking reform, and also in some instances, according to some people's view, tacking somewhat in reform's direction on issues like immigration. Actually, Labour's problem is more fundamental. In the case of the Conservatives, it's easier. They're just losing support to reform. And the Conservatives in this by-election have just recorded their worst ever by-election result. But for Labour, the problem is they're losing votes in both directions. And now, certainly, we've seen a very clear affirmation of the potential risk that the Greens can pose, particularly actually in Labour constituencies with two characteristics. One, yes, plenty of Muslims, as in Gorton, Denton, but also more generally in constituencies with relatively large numbers of younger people. That was evident already in the general election. The opinion polls are now suggesting that that pattern is now even more evident. I think one thing I disagree with Jenny Jones, the Green spokesman, those two Green successes in Conservative territory were the exception, not the rule. The Greens in the general election were primarily doing well in the kinds of places where otherwise Labour would do well. And that's one of the reasons why now we're going to be looking particularly at the extent to which the Greens can pose a challenge to Labour in London. Because London is not the kind of territory reform can do well. It is the kind of territory where potentially the Greens could. And the question now we're going to ask ourselves is, do the opinion polls next week and the week after show the Greens even higher than the 14% they're already running at, which is itself already a record high for the party? Now, maybe it will, maybe it won't. But that's now one of the big uncertainties standing over the immediate future of British politics.
Yeah, I'm just going to bring you some reaction we've had from the Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, who's posted on X. He says, the election was a victory for sectarian voting and cheating. Matt Goodwin was a good candidate for us. Roll on elections on May the 7th. It will be goodbye Starmer and goodbye to the Tory party.
Yeah, I think in fairness to Reform, I mean, we should say straight away that, their vote's gone up by nearly 15 points. Because this was a constituency with such a substantial minority population, and because, frankly, Reform's arguments about immigration and about equalities policies do not appeal to ethnic minority voters, this was never they were never as likely to do so well here or advance as strongly as they did in the Runcorn by-election, and that indeed proved to be the case. But I don't think we can take from this by-election any evidence or reason to believe that the 29% or so that the Reform Party are getting in the polls in general at the moment is in any way a false picture of where they are at. Reform will still be a challenge after tonight. It's just that now the question we are faced with is whether the scale of the challenge also being posed by the Greens has been given another significant fillip.
Can I ask you about the Conservative Party as well?
Yep.
Because they were never expected to win, but they are the official opposition party, and they've had a really bad night, if you look at the numbers.
Well, I think, by my quick calculation, it's the worst result ever for the Conservatives. 1.9% of the vote, down 6 points on the already miserable figure they had in the general election. If you go back 30 years, the Conservatives never won a constituency in this area, but they could get a third of the vote in a reasonably good year. The Conservative vote has effectively disappeared in this constituency. Same, by the way, has happened to the Democrats. 1.8%. These are shockingly low figures, and they raise questions for both parties about why they can't at least get a modicum of support in a constituency like this, even if they would want to say, well, look, this is never going to be particularly fertile territory for us.
OK, do you stay with us, John? There's loads more to talk about this. I mean, as elections go, by-elections go, this is a really interesting
Yeah, this is, I think one has to say, I mean, there are particular elections we all remember. Orpington in 1962. Some of the successes of the SDP in the 1980s. This is going to be up with those in the history books and in our political memory. This is a seismic event, What we now, of course, don't now know is just how much of the political firmament is going to shake in the longer term.
OK, for the moment, Professor Sir John Curtice, thank you very much. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Doing politics differently, and you can see on the screen there the results. Hannah Spencer winning 14,980 votes, and as I was talking with Professor Sir John Curtice a short moment ago, the margin of victory that Hannah won by confounded most pollsters. Let's have a listen to that interview with Hannah.
I think it's really clear here that people are ready for something different. We're rejecting the political parties that have always shut us out, and we're rejecting the political parties that are funded by billionaires and who have vested interests. It's really clear that people here today have decided to vote for someone like me, who is actually just pretty normal.
The Labour Deputy Leader Lucy Powell said that the Greens did a better job of being an alternative to reform. Why do you think that is?
To be honest, I don't think. I think so much of this is sort of the other political parties. I think aren't really understanding what has happened these last few weeks, and all we have done is go out and talk to people and listen to people, and that was really clear from the start of the campaign that people, when they were telling us their concerns, and they realised I was actually listening and really wanting to come up with a way of finding solutions. That cut through to people, and it's something that political parties have not done here. They have taken people's votes for granted, and when we came along and showed a positive and hopeful way of doing politics differently, people clearly decided that that's what they wanted.
In your speech just now, lots of talk about the cost of living, lots of talk about billionaires, hardly any talk about green issues. What does the Green Party stand for now?
The Green Party stands really clearly and firmly with social justice values. Of course, that includes the climate crisis, but it includes everything that everyday people struggle with, and that is the cost of living, and it is the NHS, and of course it's about fly tipping, as I mentioned, the environment around us in my speech, like those everyday issues that really affect people, that can be fixed, but that politicians for too long have ignored.
Some of your opponents accused you of sectarianism during this campaign. They pointed to leaflets and campaign videos in Urdu. What do you say to those claims?
I think all of us know what it feels like to be shut out of a system that isn't built for us, and I will always go out of my way to try and include people who may be struggling to access something. And I'm really proud that we were just different, and we showed people that we were going to try and reach them if they'd been let down by other politicians, and I really hope that the other political parties will take some lessons from this.
But there were, as I say, these claims of sectarianism. For example, there were pictures of Sakir Starmer with Narendra Modi. I mean, why was that used?
I've just been out every day talking to people, listening to people, and when people weren't able to access information in a way that other people might, like we tried to learn from that and tried to give literature and information in a language that they speak, and yeah, I'm really proud that we did that.
So would you reject those claims of sectarianism?
Yeah, I think I'm really firm that we just did what all politicians should be doing, going out into communities and listening to people.
Sir Keir Starmer has hit out at Green Party policies around legalising drugs, around wanting to withdraw from NATO, some of your economic policies. What would you say in response to him?
So I think, again, it just shows where they're really out of touch, because when we were on the doorsteps talking and the drugs, for example, came up, people were telling us the impact of having criminal drugs networks in our communities. And so when we were able to offer something different, a different way of doing things, in a way that includes people and involves a conversation, again, that resonated with people.
So you think legalising hard drugs is the right way to go?
I think we need to look at doing the system differently, because the drugs laws that we've had for nearly 60 years are failing.
And what sort of issues will you be trying to push the Labour government on when you take up your seat in Westminster?
Cost of living, because that is far too high here. We've got higher than average rates of child poverty. We've got higher than average rates of fuel poverty. We've got too many people living in insecure rented accommodation. And I know that we can push the Labour government to be better and stronger and faster. So by nationalising some of our energy companies and water companies, bringing them back into public hands because privatisation has failed. And I know that having a Green MP, the pressure of those Green MPs holding Labour to account, I think we'll achieve something better.
The early part of this campaign was dominated by a row over whether Andy Burnham would be allowed to stand for Labour. Many people within the Labour Party think that he would have beat you. Do you think he would have beat you?
Honestly, with the results tonight, who knows? I think maybe if you'd have asked me that 4 or 5 weeks ago, I might have given a slightly different answer. But from going out and speaking to thousands of people, I don't even know if that would have been enough to save them, because what is really clear throughout this is that people have felt so let down and ignored by a Labour Party that since they got into government has just constantly ignored and failed people.
This is now the Green Party's 5th seat in Parliament. So what is the party trying to do? Labour say that you can not possibly form a government yourselves, and therefore the more seats you get, the more likely it is that Reform will form the next government.
But I think they're just showing their naivety, really, in what can be achieved. And I know in my role as a councillor, I'm not new to politics. I've been a councillor for 3 years, and I've seen the impacts there of just being in the room when decisions are made. You can work cross-party on things that you agree with, and you can push other people into a better direction, and you can only do that if you have people like us there.
That's Hannah Spencer there. Well, let's conclude this half an hour and our election coverage by getting a final thought from Professor Sir John Curtice. So we talked about how groundbreaking this is for the Green Party. We've talked about the Conservatives and Reform. But let's talk a little bit more about Labour, because there will be many in the Parliamentary Labour Party saying, why didn't Sir Keir Starmer just back Andy Burnham? He's a popular candidate. That question now seems even more pressing this morning than it did 3 or 4 weeks ago. Labour's vote in this constituency has been virtually halved on what was already, by historical standards in this area, a relatively low share of the vote in 2024. The party has ended up coming 3rd. And I think it's almost inevitable that the nervousness and the questions about Sir Keir Starmer's leadership, they are simply going to be reinforced by this result. Now, I don't think anybody's expecting that all of a sudden there's going to be a move to try and remove the Prime Minister now. But I think, north of the border, we have a word that we call a shugly peg. It's for when something is only very loosely attached to the wall and is at risk of falling down. Okay. Mr. Sir Keir Starmer's position has got even weaker this morning, and he is not now in a position to withstand a poor result on that. Thank you, John. I think we're both at risk of falling down. So that concludes our election special coverage.